So, good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm Joseph van der Stegen. I work for CINEA, the agency that supports the implementation of the EU Green Deal. And I'm in the unit in charge, among others, of nature life projects. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this meeting on life and innovative funding instruments for nature. This is organized by CINEA in close collaboration, of course, with DG Environment and many people behind that I already want to thank. Today we are quite numerous. That's very good, but it also means that we have to stick to some rules. So I would like to start with that. The meeting will be recorded and available online afterwards. There will be a Slido with a QR code that will be shared a bit later. On Slido, you will be able to ask questions. And if you like the questions, like it so that there is more chance that we will answer it. When you ask a question, please add your name and possibly your organization too, and be concise. As there might be many questions, please have concise questions and to the point. So the attendants won't be able to talk, but again, the questions are more than welcome. We will not be able to answer all questions, but we'll make our best to answer the key ones. Now, I will give the floor to Laszlo Beshi. Laszlo Beshi is head of sector in my unit. Laszlo, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this first live networking event that we organized this year. I'm actually quite impressed by the number of participants. I hope it's not a secret, but we more than 700 people registered. So I don't know how many we are here today, but it's clearly a figure that demonstrates that the topic we have chosen for today is of interest for many people around Europe. So what's the topic? Joseph mentioned briefly the title, but as we know, restoration and management of nature requires substantial funding that traditionally mostly came from public sources, both from the EU and from national sources. But to meet the targets of the new nature restoration regulation, but also the other targets that we have in the other objectives of the nature directives, these conventional public sources will definitely not be sufficient in the future. So we do need to look around and seek alternatives. But many of our light projects, as well as other entities, have already done part of that homework. And some of them we have invited today to share with you their experience in searching for, putting in place, or using innovative funding. In the coming 2.5 days, therefore, you will hear about the lessons they have learned, to see concrete examples, so not just theory, but the examples that they have found and they have worked on from these projects, both in the plenary sessions, but also in thematic sessions. You will also have the chance, as Joseph mentioned, to raise your questions throughout the event via Slido. Unfortunately, because of the numbers, we cannot engage into one-on-one discussions. And I do wish to emphasize that even though it's a live event, the idea is not really to demonstrate the co-funding options for the live projects themselves, but rather funding opportunities that could be used for the broader restoration efforts. Of course, not excluding that such options can be also benefiting the live projects that we fund. And remember that even though we are online, it's a networking event. So I encourage you to get engaged in the question-answer sessions. And hopefully you can continue networking with each other even after these 2 days. And without wanting to take more time away from the actual discussions, I wish you a successful event and give the word back to Joseph. And thank you. Joseph, you're muted.
Yes, good to know. Thank you. So thank you very much, Laszlo, for this introduction. Now I will pass the floor to Adrien Michel. Adrien Michel is Policy Officer in DG Environment. And he will give us a policy introduction. Adrien, this is your time.
Thank you, Joseph, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Adrien Michel. I work in DG Environment within the Biodiversity Unit, and I will talk today about the landscape, the financing landscape within the EU for nature restoration, and what are the perspectives for its further development. And I will highlight notably the nature credits. So next slide, please. So when it comes to financing restoration, nature restoration, it's not only a requirement mandatory under the Nature Restoration Regulation, and this is mentioned in the Article 14.12, that we need to deploy private and public support schemes to the benefit of stakeholders. So it's not only about requirements, it's also because it makes a lot of economic sense. Within the impact assessment to the nature restoration law, we have calculated that on average, the multiplier effect of nature restoration investments is more than 8. That means that for every euro spent, you get more than 8 euros of benefits in returns. We will see in the next slides whether this is commensurate with what we observe on the ground, and whether this is sufficient, and what are the main issues related to biodiversity financing. First of all, where do we stand at EU funding level? Well, as you can see, in the current MFF, the total funding available for biodiversity amounts to 112 billion euros, which is quite a significant amount. More than half of it coming from the agricultural policy funds, and a good share of it also coming from the regional policy funds. But well, this is in a way not misleading, but just to highlight the fact that many of these funds are not directly targeted at biodiversity. So when you see the biodiversity financing, it simply says that out of the massive injection of public funds in the agricultural or regional policy, there's a share which is partly or fully dedicated to the protection of the environment. But if you consider only the funding that is fully dedicated to that, then you have the Horizon calls and the LIFE program, which you know, and the amounts specifically dedicated are much more reduced. Next slide, please. So maybe the first question that comes to mind is whether these 112 billion euros are sufficient to cover the needs. And the answer is no, because we've estimated the financing needs in the EU biodiversity strategy for 2030. That was really ahead of the negotiations for the restoration regulation, and we estimated them approximately at 48 billion euros per year. The 112, the EU funding programs, if you annualize it, it amounts to 16 billion euros. If you add up to that national budgets, national contributions, and private financing, you reach a level of 29 billion euros over the decade. So that leaves a financing gap of approximately 19 billion euros for the decade, which for the next decade is likely to be in absolute terms a higher amount, all things being equal otherwise. So this is the first question. The second question in the next slide is maybe even more tricky, is that is the financing sustainably providing the means to the parcel owners, to the stakeholders in the restoration world, to implement these nature restoration projects and benefit from them in the long run. And this is a quite telling example from a nature restoration project in the forest sector, where you can see the distribution of costs versus benefits. And you see that at the beginning of the project, of course, you need to invest into capital costs. So that could be, cutting down the trees existing in order to replace them by other natural spaces that are not meant to be used for timber production. So you have to undergo some capital cost. You also have to make the new trees grow, and this implies operational maintenance costs. And also you need to give up some potential revenues with the reduced timber production from your parcel. On the other hand, you have a number of benefits which together outweigh the costs. But the main problem here is that they are unevenly distributed between the private benefits that can be monetized, that go back to the project to the project sponsor, and the other benefits which are societal benefits and that do not necessarily translate into revenues for the project sponsor. And here you have some definition of the different benefits, be it through the release of carbon credits for carbon sequestration, or the reduced fire risk, which translates into reduced insurance premiums for your assets, and also potential revenues through new avenues like ecotourism activities. But for the rest, the public benefits, there is no quantification so far. And this leads me to the second part of my presentation, which is the existence of nature credits. Next slide, please. So what are nature credits? Basically is a way to certify the actions, the positive actions that you are undertaking for the restoration of nature, and translating them into a monetized asset which you can trade in the market. Next slide, please. So that is a mean to reward farmers, for example, or parcel owners for their good practices in terms of biodiversity. We have identified a number of business cases that would advocate for the creation of nature credit schemes, and it really compare well with the previous slides that I've shown on the private sector. You will identify them easily. For example, on the carbon credit fourth line, it's already in the previous slide. But the idea is to have one single instrument, namely the nature credit, that covers all those business cases into one. Next slide, please. This is far from being straightforward, of course, because in order to design such a market, so to say, first of all, you need to make sure that all stakeholders are involved. This is essential for this new type of scheme to fly properly, and to make sure that they are aware of the existence of such a scheme and they can see the benefit of it. The second thing you need to do is to make sure that the scheme you are putting in place is reliable. That is, that the assets that are going to be traded in the market, either sold or bought, relate to something material, an investment that is material for biodiversity. So this is about trust and confidence. Then comes the technicalities. How do you set up the market? For how long will the biodiversity credits be operational? What is the implied revenues? What is the price? For how long can you hold them and get a benefit from them? That these are really essential questions. And the fourth part is that you really need to make sure that MRVs, measurement, reporting, and verification are well in place, so you can make sure that there is no risk whatsoever of for example, greenwashing, or even more, or even fraud. Next slide, please. So it all looks very complicated, but first good news, we're not starting from scratch. There's a lot of initiatives out there, even outside the EU, namely in the UK or in Brazil, Colombia, Australia, and so forth. And they all rely on the academic work and investigation work undertaken by several international structures, such as the Biodiversity Credits Islands or the International Advisory Panel on Biodiversity Credits. And the other good news, next slide, please, is that we're also doing our homework internally within the EU, and we have started the work in 2 pilot schemes for nature credits that are being financed under the LIFE program with the Green Assist, the Technical Assistance Program in the LIFE. One is in France. It's about supporting the wetlands restoration in the basin of the Seine River. And the other one is a private-public partnership for nature credits in the forests of Estonia. And this is dealing with forest owner on one hand and private tech companies on the other side. So you see, there's a lot of it going on. We will try to draw the lessons from these pilots when they come to an end in order to work further on the development of nature credits in the future. I think I'm over time, so I would stop here. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Adrien. Thank you very much for this overview of what is happening at Commission level. Now I pass the floor to Mrs. Baez Zapater. Sorry for the pronunciation. Mrs. Baez Zapater works for the Forest Ownership Center of Catalonia in Spain, and she will give us an overview of innovative financing mechanism, especially in the field of forestry. Mrs. Baez, are you online?
Yes.
Okay,
thank you, Joseph. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Welcome and good morning. And this is your turn.
Thank you, Joseph. Can say Teresa too. So thank you for inviting us on behalf of the Life Biogas Consortium, which I'm going to speak of. Thank you for inviting to this very interesting webinar. I'm sorry I cannot stay the whole morning, but tomorrow I'll try to join in case any questions arise. So we've been invited to present our a report we produce in the Life Biogas project on available innovative financing mechanisms, specifically for forest biodiversity, although also, as it was mentioned, many cases they refer to nature as in general. Next, please. So yeah, so in the project we produce a report, the one you see in your left side. This was done by external experts led by Elena Gorriz at the CTFC and Ignasi Puig, and this is the deep research report with lots of examples. So if you're interested in details of the examples, you better have a look at this one. But we also produce this other one, the one you have in your right side, from the user's point of view. So the forest owners associations, the forestry administration, and the nature conservation network, which is a guide, which is a summary of the previous one with some recommendations on how to apply it. Next, please, in Spanish and English. So the report is divided in these 3 main chapters. So one is on public mechanisms, mainly those related to taxes, and then the incentives from the Rural Development Program and the CAP, Interreg and LIFE programs, the grants from other public bodies, and the green funds. Then the more direct private mechanisms that companies use, like the capital funds, the certifications, FSC, PFC, and then everything that is related to corporate social responsibility, ESG reporting, taxonomy, and patronage. And finally, there's the third chapter is on these instruments that were private more at the beginning, but now becoming more and more private-public mechanisms, like the voluntary carbon markets, biodiversity banks and credits, payment for environmental services, and the insurances. So next, please. Of course, in 10 minutes, we cannot go through all of them in detail. So we decided to choose 4 approaches to share with you from our users' perspective. And the first one would be on the tax instruments. So the idea is that you see here the list of like a general list of taxes that on forest companies and on forest owners or forests in general. So do you have these existing taxes, and how can we apply benefits to them, to those forest owners that are engaged in biodiversity or in conservation measures? This is not an innovative idea at all. I mean, this is an old request from the beginning of the 90s, from different sites. We have in Spain a proposal from the organizations of forest professionals and forest owners, but also from environmental organizations that it's now being presented to the Congress, to the Spanish Congress. And this is to apply, especially in these taxes that are highlighted in bold. So benefits to those foresters which are active compared to fight against abandonment. To those with forest management plans or certified or under stewardship agreements and so on. And of course, every time you propose a tax benefit, you have to assume the loss of revenue or to prove that this loss of revenue can be compensated by, for instance, creating new green jobs, that we produce other sources of revenue somewhere else. So next, please. So besides benefits on already existing taxes, and there's also the possibility to propose new tax instruments that can be used specifically to finance forest biodiversity projects. There is a list of different taxes that have been created with this purpose in different countries in Europe. And I just wanted to highlight one that we are using in Catalonia. This is a tax on the CO2 for motor cars. And so everybody owning a car has to pay 42 euros tax. This raises in total 80 million euros per year, that by law they have 50% of those have to go to the climate fund and 50% to the biodiversity and natural heritage fund. Of course, when you are creating new tax or fees, you need to identify who has the regulatory capacity. Most taxes depend on the state or the regions, and maybe that can go beyond the scope of your live project, but just to remember that fees that are more finalist and devoted to linked to the users, and can also be created and modified at local level. And we have found many examples on that in Spain and in Europe, like, for instance, the allocation of a percentage of the property tax by municipalities to biodiversity projects. Next, please. So the second approach we wanted to share was, of course, the rural development plans and the CAP strategic plans. We found that in Spain, but also in other countries in Europe, the pro-biodiversity sustainable forest management is mainly financed by the state public funds and regional public funds via the rural development plans. Although there are other public bodies that are also investing in financing these measures for, like, natural parks or local administration, but it's mainly these measures in the CAP strategic plans. And although there are measures with great potential to influence forest biodiversity, the reality is that the flexibility that is provided in the present CAP strategic plans is to achieve these environmental ambitions is very rarely used, especially when it comes to forest management and linked to biodiversity. So in the report, we proposed, like, to two improvements that can be applied in this new period that is now being defined, no, like to overcome this heterogeneity in measures that makes it very difficult to implement and to monitor, because every region, every country is activating different ones. So for instance, by systematic planning and introduction of logging or hunting rights for environmental purposes, or to use the potential for existing innovative instruments like the result-based payments, which is really challenging when it comes to biodiversity, even due to the different timescales and so on. But they have lots of potential, and also especially the collective approaches. So next, please. The third approach would be the green funds. So like green funds as a tool to channel these regular revenues to focus on projects that might be with a higher risk, no? Then these green funds that are created by law, and they can be fed by different types of income, like these fees or finalist taxes, or entry tickets, or fines to forestry. Then I mean, there are different examples in different countries, as you can see here in your left side, and as well in different countries they are being used for different biodiversity or nature conservation measures, or sustainable forest management measures. And together with this, we wanted to show you other public mechanisms that complement these green funds that have been put in place in Catalonia in the last year, like it's the registry of land properties with initiatives for the conservation of natural heritage, and which will serve as a basis to prioritize subsidies and other grants. And also a new grant to incentivize ecosystem services related to biodiversity and sustainable forest management. And next, please, I will show you this example in particular. This is the source of finance is a public green fund, which is the Biodiversity Heritage Fund, which is created in our biodiversity law. It's fed by this new tax I mentioned on CO2 cars, and the instrument to mobilize this money to the private forest owners is a grant to create forest reserves or to integrate biodiversity criteria into productive thinnings. Next, please. The final approach we want to share with you was these market-driven mechanisms. This is a graph from Anastasia Shukina from FAO in a very nice webinar she made in October. So if you're interested, we can share with you the links to it. On private finance, I mean, there are many sources of private finance. I'm sure you will hear about it today. And at different stages of project development, they are used. But I wanted to highlight this that has already been mentioned, that the biodiversity credit markets are now the hot topic internationally, but also in the voluntary carbon markets. Our new European carbon farming regulation includes the obligation to demonstrate co-benefits on biodiversity. And next, please. Also, this is, as mentioned, a controversial issue, but there's growing consensus on the possibilities of these instruments, and this just to share the framework for high integrity biodiversity credits markets that was approved in Cali in October 2024, and based in these three main criteria, that we need to make evidence-based contributions, to work at local in not international compensation impacts, and to focus on insetting rather as opposed to offsetting. Next, please. An example of that I want to share with you, coming from another LIFE project, which is not a LIFE BRGS, but LIFE CLIMARC. We try to apply all these principles of high integrity and combination of different benefits of sustainable forest management in one single credit, we called it climate credit system, which integrates into a single transactional unit the benefits of forest management on biodiversity restoration, carbon balance, and water availability. The source of finance is mainly private, from companies to associations of local forest owners, but the instrument is public. It's a regional public market, and the additionality is that the sustainable forest management has to be integrative forest management. That means integrate biodiversity conservation criteria. Next, please.
Teresa, might ask you.
Yeah, it's a final.
You can wrap up. Thank you.
yeah, this is just the final recommendation. So for that, in the report, we need clear metrics, which is really challenging, strong governance, community engagement, the aggregation of supply, so landscape scales approach to make coherence and impact, and the aggregation of demand. It's just on the clear metrics. Next, please. We wanted to show the instrument we defined in the Bay Orchards project, and we are now improving in the Life GoPro format project, which is the indexes of biodiversity potential. It's a proxy index that can help overcome this challenging of the finding indicators for a results-based approach. Next, please. And just I wanted to end with the target 18 of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which highlights that besides all these positive incentives I've been mentioning, which really priority is to eliminate the harmful incentives for biodiversity. And if you are interested in that, you have here in this link a nice list of examples on how to do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Teresa, for this concrete insight of what's happening also already in Catalonia. Also, thanks to a live project that was very good. I would just remind you that there is this Slido QR code for asking questions. I would also like to recall that the meeting will be available online, will be recorded. So the presentation will be available online, but a bit later. Now, I would like to pass the floor to Lynn Barratt. Lynn Barratt will moderate a session with concrete presentation of live projects which have worked on funding instruments. Lynn, are you there?
I am, yes, thank you.
Good, so it's for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph. I don't see myself yet.
I see you.
Okay, I don't see myself on the screen, but anyway, I'll start because I know we're very short of time. So I'm going to present or ask the presenters of 4 projects from the Life family to give you some examples now on practical application of some of these, schemes, and how do you actually put them into practice. So I'm going to call first upon Carlos Ruiz, who is going to tell us about the Life Olivares Vivos Plus project. So Carlos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to the organization for the opportunity to present some of our work and our insights. Next slide, please. As you have seen in the title, I would like to address this question. Does increasing biodiversity have the potential to trigger private funding? And in our case, it's very clear. Next slide. And the answer is yes, but let's take a closer look at the details. Next, please. I have divided this presentation into 3 main parts. First, I will briefly introduce the overall project. Then I will explain the Olivares Vivos agri-environmental scheme. And finally, I will focus on potential funding sources and how we have prioritized one of them. Next, please. So first, I would like to give you some background. We have been working on this project for almost 10 years, thanks to the financial support of the LIFE program in 2 different phases. Next, please. In the first phase, the first project, our 3 main objectives were first to develop and to test a farming model based on an agro-environmental scheme. Second, to explore strategies for improving profitability. And very importantly, third, to establish a certification system based on the project results. And we have used this certification system as the main channel to get funding from the farming sector. Next, please. In the second phase, which is still ongoing, we are now replicating the model in different olive growing regions of Spain and Europe. And additionally, we have started to transfer it to other crops. Next, please. Our farming model is implemented through an agri-environmental scheme. So what exactly is this Olivares Vivos agri-environmental scheme? Next, please. It is a concept that is really simple and easy to understand. It is built on 3 different pillars. First, the sustainable management of herbaceous cover, focusing on agronomic benefits while maximizing ecological function, as we are working in permanent crops, olive groves, and in the transfer with almonds and other permanent crops like vineyards. So the herbaceous cover is basic for us. Second, the restoring of non-productive areas within the farm, such as the roadsides, the field boundaries, or different irregular patches. And third is installing different structures to support fauna, favoring their return and improving ecological connectivity. Although the scheme is straightforward, it must be tailored to each farm, and we should also incorporate all the lessons learned throughout all the process. Next, please. So from the start, we wanted that our model to be result-based. So for that, and to measure the effectiveness of our restoration actions, we selected several indicators and conducted rigorous monitoring before and after the implementation of the agri-environmental scheme. Overall, our results have been very positive. Species richness increased by about 7% and abundance by approximately 18%. One of the interesting outcomes is that the biggest improvements were seen on farms with the poorest initial conservation conditions. And it's important to note that these results were achieved just 3 years after the intervention. So modeling our data, we estimate that biodiversity richness could increase by up to 35% in the medium and long term, as these restoration actions need time to be more effective. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at the different funding sources that can help to implement this kind of agricultural models in other areas and on a larger scale. Next, please. There are 4 key funding sources for this typical intervention in agroecosystem. They are much more simplified than we have seen before, but first is the public subsidies, which have been the most significant source of funding so far, and for sure will continue to play a key role in conservation and restoration in agroecosystems. Second is the farmer investments, which we consider the main funding channel for our model, as certified farms invest in meeting certification requirements. We will see now how we mobilize this investment in more detail. Third, there is the private funding, which, as we have seen, is likely to grow in the coming years, especially through biodiversity credit systems or nature credit systems. And finally, the consumers whose purchasing decisions can directly influence the success of this model. Consumers can also indirectly impact in the mobilization of the other 3 funding sources. Next, please. So now let's focus on farmer investments, which, as I mentioned, it is supposed to be the main funding source for our farming model. Farmers are motivated to invest in biodiversity restoration when they understand how it can improve their profitability. And there are 3 main ways this happens. There is the economic support for the agricultural policies, which increasingly reward environmental services provided by farms. Then there is the input cost reductions through the improved ecosystem services. And then we have the added value of the products, which in our case is achieved through the Olivares Vivos certification seal. Let's explore now these 3 ways in more detail. Next, please. So regarding agricultural policy subsidies, especially those coming from the CAP, they are increasingly tied to meeting environmental requirements. Farms implementing the Olivares Vivos model easily meet the criteria for eco-scheme payments and other interventions under the CAP rural development programs, at least in the case of Spain. Next, please. Then we have the enhanced ecosystem services through environmental restoration. That this is another key factor in improving profitability. During the first phase of our project, demonstration farms reduced pesticide use by 20. And this wasn't only due to increased ecosystem services. Of course, there wasn't time enough for the restoration to provide all these ecosystem services in this short term. but it was also due to a shift in farmers' mindsets, because they, by engaging in restoration work, became more observant and precise in their pesticides use. So they move away from what we call the calendar treatments, and they start applying chemicals only when it was absolutely necessary. In our midterm report, we have also checked that there is a reduced pest incidence near the restored areas. And additionally, in general, we are creating a more complex agroecosystem that improves resilience as ecological stability increase the ecological complexity. Next, please. So adding value to the product is a crucial factor in profitability. The Olivares Bio certification seal informs consumers that the products come from farms that have increased biodiversity, which many consumers value. Producers report different benefits, such as higher demand for bottled oil, which offer better profit margins, the ability to increase selling prices, or the access to new markets, particularly in countries like South Korea or Germany. To give an example, one of the cooperatives we are working with was recently selected by the BioSwiss label as their main supplier for organic olive oil. And the participation in Olivares Vivos was, according to BioSwiss, a key factor for their decision. This has not only opened them a new market opportunity in Switzerland, but also the purchase price that they are receiving is 25% higher than the usual price for this type of oil. Next slide, please. So farmers, therefore, are motivated to invest in environmental improvement, expecting to secure subsidies. Sorry?
1 minute.
Okay. Expecting to secure subsidies, lower operating costs, and achieve better market positioning. Next slide, please. So finally, consumer habits act as a thermometer of society, reflecting what society demands. If consumers as a whole ask for these types of products and for environmental responsible production methods, it would become more and more viable for private investors to allocate funds to this initiative, because this could be motivated by the corporate social responsibility goals, for genuine interest, or because it's also taken into account by the biodiversity credit systems. But at the same time, the increased consumer interest in environmental added value products will drive greater resources from public bodies, encouraging the transition of the agricultural operations toward these production models. So finally, stronger consumer demand expand the market for producers, allowing them to sell their products more easily, because this reduces their costs in areas like promotion or marketing, making their business more sustainable and more profitable overall. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, our project suggests that working across the entire value chain, especially with producers and consumers, is essential to impact the market and to attract new funding. In agriculture, farmers should be the primary channel for mobilizing available funds and to implement the conservation measures. Of course, we will need to provide them with proper training and proper guidance. Finally, we must recognize the critical role of consumers and work continuously on education and awareness to foster responsible consumption. So, next slide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for that excellent talk. And I know your project very well, and I know you're getting some great results. So now we're going to move very swiftly to Paul Ledbitzer from the United Kingdom, and he is going to talk to us about the Pennine Peatlife project. Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So my name is Paul Ledbitzer, and I do thank you for asking me to attend and speak at this meeting. We are a previous LIFE project that ended a couple of years ago, and I want to just show you about what we did and how we are now working at scale in the private sector finance industry. So I call this the Green Finance Challenge because it is a challenge. There are lots of things you have to think about, lots of things you have to do, and it's a lot of work to get these new markets up and running. And some of the previous speakers have already said that. Next, please. So the project ran from 2017 to 2023, and it had 4 main objectives, which will be shown in the next slide. So basically, it was about demonstrating and evaluating appropriate restoration techniques for blanket bog in the harsh environment of Northern England. And the objectives were really to, if you just click on those, to restore, demonstrate restoration at scale. And then the next one was to look at the UK Peatland Code. This is the asterisk one. This is the one that's helped us develop how we can get green finance into restoration of peatlands in the UK. I'll talk a bit more about that. And the next was demonstrating UAVs. At the time, UAVs were a new thing, unmanned, unpersoned aerial vehicles. Now they are what you do. It's a standard operation to use those. But at the time, they were quite new, and it was a bit of an innovation we tried. And the fourth objective was to disseminate the information, as any good life project does. If you want to click on that. So we did do that, and we continue to do it, as I am today, talking to over 300 people across the EU about this project that has now ended. And I would like to say that the success we have now with something called the Great North Bog is built on the shoulder and the funding of the LIFE program. So thank you to the LIFE program for allowing that. Next, please. Okay, so here's an image of a damaged blanket bog. It's one of the LIFE sites, and you can see this is the scale we operate at. That's one of the a bit of one of the sites we restored. And next one, please. And this is the site, interestingly, where half of it was restored. One of the challenges we have is landowners' fences don't necessarily and nature's boundaries don't often align. So it's an example of a site that was restored on the right and a site yet to be restored because the landowner's not that keen. So one of the challenges we still have is about convincing people to do the work. And ideally, green finance will help us deal with that. Next one, please. So again, a site at a smaller level, you take know-how, you take specialized people, specialized techniques, the right funding, the right permissions, you apply the interventions, and then click. 3 years later, you can see that you have a site that is, next slide, restored. So you can see that's where you generate your biodiversity credits and also your carbon credits in this case. So that is quite a useful tool to show investors this is how you do these things. So peatlands are actually, I think, more advanced in terms of the process because peatland restoration has perhaps been around longer than other ecosystems. So I'm going to share with you some of the things we've done since the LIFE project finished. Next slide, please. So how do you meet the new challenges? Next. This is a picture I took very early on. It's a sheep that unfortunately has decided to drop dead on a bare peat. And how do you take that idea of peat forming, which that sheep will be in 8,000 years, 2 or 3 meters down in the profile, and convert it into next that? How do you link those things? Because peatlands are often seen as scary, smelly, dangerous places. How do you get buy-in from, let's say, private sector, from corporates? And this is what we did. Next, please. Okay, so the Great North Bog was a result of the Pennine Peat Life project, which worked in my area, North Pennines in Yorkshire. And we were concerned after Brexit, we were concerned about how do we access macro scale funding, which is required here. So we decided to work together. And it's worth noting that 3 of the partners here were previously funded by LIFE. Those are Yorkshire Peat Partnership, Austin North Pennines, and Moors for the Future. So we have 3 LIFE projects, and we've come together about 4 years ago to develop the Great North Bog with the idea of developing a £200 million blended finance plan to restore these peatlands. Next, please. And if you can just, there'll be about 7 or 8 things you can click down here. So this is what we've done so far. The Great North Bog has restored 160,000 hectares of peatlands collectively, 20 years in the making, and that a lot of that has to do with the LIFE program. We have 70 years worth of experience. We've raised 120 million pounds. And key to this is we need to start to articulate more how much that money's been spent in the local economy. That is a very interesting driver in the UK to access new types of investment, social impact investment. It's a peatlands restoration is a green industry, lots of jobs, good careers. We work at the local to international to global level, which is something that's quite important, and I'm very proud of the fact we do that. And it's a collaborative macro scale nature conservation program. Next, please. So the progress of the Great North Bog, and you can click down 5 or 6 times on this too. The governance is in place. When you have 6 partners, made up of different organizations such as protected areas like North Pennines or national parks or wildlife trusts. Governance is quite important. So that's in place now. We have a strategy that's been developed. And the Great North Bog kicked off in the last year of the Pennine Peat Life Project. So there's an overlap here, but it's been immensely helpful to help us get to where we are today. So what we did, and perhaps one of the most innovative things we did, is to act at scale, which we know governments like, international investors like. And then we decided, rather than wait for the market to come to us, we went out to the market and said, if you want to work with the Great North Bog teams to deliver restoration today at scale, please apply for the job to be our one of our finance partners, with the idea of selling carbon credits, which we tested through the Pennine Peat Life Project. So we went out to the market and 15 applied. We went through a process, due diligence completed on each of the corporates. We then interviewed them. We had a year-long interview sessions, kind of quarterly meetings to discuss where we were and what they wanted and what we wanted. And it was really interesting. It's been a fascinating journey. But we ended up with two finance partners. One is one of the largest construction companies in the UK. The other one is one of the largest food companies in the world, who are now signed up to be partners in Great North Bog when it comes to buying carbon credits. We also have, through an EU project called Waterlands Project, a green finance trainee, because one of the challenges we have is there aren't enough people in the conservation sector with these specialized skills. Thank you. Next. Okay, current priorities. You can just whiz through about 5 or 6 clicks here. We have to decide on a special purpose vehicle. What is a Great North Bog? Is it a charity? Is it a company? Is it a X? Is it a Y? That's quite important, because we hope to access £200 million worth of contracts, let's say. So we have to determine that. We are almost at the end of that process now. We have to work to solve the carbon market barriers. Things like the price of carbon is far too low. I hear all these rumors and myths about it being £100 here or 200 euros there. In the voluntary market, it's not. It's what anybody will pay for it. But we have the first contracts being developed literally as we speak. There are lawyers on each side of a big project and a big corporate who are developing the contracts and working out all the ins and outs of these things. So it's the first one we had. It's a very big one. And we have other ones now starting to line up. So one of the tricks has been getting one going. And now we have one going. It's starting to get interest, because we are trying to pay a very good dividend for this. So we're also looking at developing CSR and ESG markets. When you say investing, there's a wide spectrum of things you can do, but we have done very well. Last year, we got €1 million from a German organization for CSR money. So don't forsake CSR, and don't focus just on investment with returns. We're also looking to develop donation models. We have one corporate we're working with. Every time you book something with them, £1 goes into the pot, and we're currently tracking about £60,000 a year. That's a staff member. That is money that we can use as match funding. We're also looking to develop collaborative bids with UK governments. So rather than go as the North Pennines only, we go as 3 or 4 Great North Bog partners and go to the funders, and they quite like that. Again, the scale is important. And the key thing is to keep the pipeline going. If we're not restoring peatlands, we're talking about restoring peatlands, which isn't as important as restoring peatlands. So we at the Great North Bog restore currently about 20,000 hectares a year. So we are one of the biggest games going in peatland restoration in Europe, I think. And then keeping the momentum going. There's all sorts of challenges, new governments in the UK, new macro political forces at play around the world, but keeping the momentum going. And that's what we're continuing to do. Thank you.
Paul, thank you so much for that really insightful look at how we can really scale up and bring in big investment. And we'll come on, I'm sure, with questions. We're getting a lot of questions on the Slido, for which we thank you. We will not have time to take them all in this session, but just to remind, all of these panelists will be back in the second half of the programme, and I'm sure we'll pick up some of the outstanding questions from there. So I'm going to now give the floor to Katerina, and she is from the Life Metamorphosis Project. Katerina, the floor is yours. I beg your pardon.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak here. Today, I work for a non-governmental organization called BROS, Conservation Association, that works in Slovakia and is professional nature conservation organization. Please, next slide. As I mentioned, so it's the small non-governmental organization if we think in terms of Europe. But we already had more than 30 live projects, and in most of them we are coordinating beneficiary. We have many partners from private as well as state sector. And most of our projects were co-financed by Ministry of Environment, but we always had to raise or find at least 5% of our own contribution. That's on average, because it really depends on the project and the time of the co-financing. To cover co-financing of live projects, we had to use various sources of co-finance, and that's mostly corporate, then crowdfunding and grants and foundations throughout Europe. Please, next slide. As it was mentioned, I work on Life Metamorphosis project, but I also work on other life projects as well, either in the past or also currently. But this one is 6.5-year project. It covers also areas not only in Slovakia, but we have partners in Hungary and Romania, and we work in 30 areas. We concentrate on conservation of butterflies. So there are 16 species of butterflies, but also the habitat for the best of butterflies. The main focus is on restoration of habitats. So those are pastures, wetlands, rocky formations, and so on, but also restoration of populations and new protected areas. So here comes the little trick, because the co-financing of Ministry of Environment now goes only to public bodies. Since the last year, we have a new government and there is a constant pressure to suppress the civil society and non-governmental organization in Slovakia now. So we were excluded from the co-financing, but the public bodies that are partners of these projects, which is State Nature Conservation and Slovak Academy of Science, they still get the co-financing. So from now on, as we learned that just recently, 3 months ago, we have to start to look for more funding. So I hope I will get plenty of ideas during this meeting. But these projects run only 2 years, so there are not so many examples to talk about, but I chose for you 4 innovative and interesting examples from our work, from also other projects, but also focusing on butterflies. So please, next slide. So this is the cooperation with the textile company. It's a company that has a seat in Slovakia, but it also expands into 12 other European countries. So we started the cooperation and we designed the new socks with them that were focused on protected species. Please, next slide. There will be some text. So we also created the texts that also talk about the nature conservation, and people could buy the socks. And of course, from each purchase, we got some very small amount of money. But please, next. And in total, in long-term cooperation, we gained more than 100,000 euros from this. So this was not only focused on butterflies, but also other species, bird species, or European ground squirrels. So this was quite popular. Please, next slide. This is also very interesting in means of cooperation. We had the charity pop-up dinner that was organized by quite famous chef and with his friends. So we organized the beneficiary dinner with 7-course menu. He's the chef that also cooks for state visits and presidents when they come in Slovakia. So this was really visited event by many people. And we fundraised money for wetlands. So we came also and presented our projects during the dinner. And we gained in one evening 20,000 euros for this event. Please, next slide. I'm sure that everyone heard about crowdfunding. So I think probably state organizations and so don't use that much, but we as a non-governmental organization use that quite a lot. But we learn a very important thing, that you have to really find something special, something innovative, something people also can gain something from that. So we created Wetland and Meadow Tales. That's the book of fairy tales dealing with restoration activities. We teamed three live projects for this book, and we asked three professional authors for children to write the tales, and also professional illustrator. And we used the crowdfunding to print the book, and now it is also sold in several bookstores. So this crowdfunding and this campaign was worth 20,000 euros as well, and you can still find the books in the bookstores, and it's also very interesting for PR purposes of our projects. And please, next slide. And we also had a very huge crowdfunding campaign for land purchase. It's 42 hectares of former field that was arable land before, and it was not the part of the Natura 2000 site, so we were not really sure if we can use the live projects for that. So we start with the crowdfunding campaign. We had to purchase the land, and our message was now or never. So please help us to buy this wetland. So we started a huge campaign. We asked plenty of famous people to join. We had a campaign very continuous for 1 year, and we were able to gain another 100,000 euro in 1 year. Actually, it was the most successful campaign in Slovakia for nature conservation so far. It's very important, so you have something to tell people that why you want to crowdfund on to have a clear messages, but also it's important people can see and can imagine. If you are crowdfunding for some measures like, okay, I will restore some wetland, it's not so appealing to people as you have something very concrete. So they can imagine, okay, if I give 100 euro, I can get 5 square meters of the land, and this is my wetland. And we also had a campaign with people buying that as a present for Christmas and so on. And we were quite lucky, so we were able also to later designate the site as a Natura 2000 site. So we were able to use that as a co-financing for running live project.
1 minute, Katerina.
And that's my last slide. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Katerina. So very different kind of set of circumstances there, different kind of model. I'm sure we'll have questions about that too. Our final speaker in this session is Giulia Amato, and she is going to talk to us about the Life Brenta 2030 project from Italy. Giulia, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, and good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here and present you the Life Brenta 2030 project, which successfully developed an innovative financing scheme for water and biodiversity in a river ecosystem. Next slide, please. Before jumping into the context, I would like to say a very few words about the organization I come from. So I work in Etipo, and we are an environmental consulting company with the main aim of putting nature at the heart of the decision-making by developing science-based solutions. Next slide, please. And in doing so, we adopt an approach that tries to make us scientists following a solid scientific base in everything we do. Inventors, so finding the best innovative ways of solving the problems with our clients and partners, and facilitators, so trying to co-create projects and services using participatory techniques with our partners. So starting with this approach, we can go to the next slide and starting presenting you the context. So we are in this area, which is the Middle Brenta area. Next slide, please. We are located in northern Italy. It is a 7 kilometers long area, which covers 2 provinces and 15 municipalities. And it has several interesting features. Next slide, please. The first one, most important, is that it is very rich in biodiversity. And in fact, it is a Natura 2000 site, which has a lot of different habitats, which you can find in this map that was developed through the project. Next slide, please. But it is also a very strategic and important source for drinking water at regional level. In fact, it has a 700 liters per second abstraction of water, which is then distributed to more or less 1.5 million people in the area. So you can understand this is really important to preserve water quality in the area. And then, next slide, please. It is also surrounded by agricultural sector, where we mainly find cornfields and meadows, which are used for cattle feeding. Next slide, please. So starting from 2016, a big initiative was started by Etipol in the area, which is called Parco Fiume Brenta, which means a park for the River Brenta, that tries to develop a comprehensive strategy for the valorization of ecosystem services in the area. Next slide, please. So from back to 2016, we had long-term strategy with different financing sources, starting with a crowdfunding, and then we had 2 RDP projects. And then in 2019, we had a bigger Life project, which was called the Life Brenta project, which gave us some new energy, let's say, to develop the innovative financing scheme. And now the life is over. Of course, we are still working on new projects to propose. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of the project partners. So the leader is the ETRA, which is the local municipality, which, as you will see, is central for developing the mechanism. And then there are other local municipalities and underwater managers bodies. Next slide, please. So the project aimed to resolve 2 main issues. The first one was about the governance. So locally, even if there were a Natura 2000 site, there were no local governance body. Therefore, there were little funding for nature, no adequate management of the drinking water protection areas, no management of the land use conflicts, and a lot of sectoral policies and bodies which went in conflict between each other about the management of the resources. Next slide, please. The second big problem, of course, was about the disappearing of multifunctional ecosystems. So we had in the past a lot of wetlands and a lot of water springs that would not be found anymore in the area because of the lowering of the water table. We found limited ecological connection and a lot of risk connected with agricultural uses. Next slide, please. That's why inside the LIFE project, we developed an innovative financing mechanism for ecosystem services, which has its base on the what we call the environmental and resource costs that are called in brief ERC, and the tentative to include this kind of cost into the water tariff. Next slide, please. So we are moving inside the integrated water service sector, which is an industrial model of water resource management that ensures its renewability. As it is a public service, it has a dedicated regulation and a tariff. Therefore, a tariff, of course, is a system of collective financing from service users. Next slide, please. Of course, all of this starts from the Water Framework Directive, back in 2000, where the Article 9 contains 2 important principles. The polluter user pays principle that says basically that the person who pollutes or who uses the resources, the water resources, is also the person who should pay for covering all the costs associated with this pollution or use. While the full cost recovery simply states that all the costs associated with the water use or pollution should be covered through the tariff. Next slide, please. Also including the environmental and the resource costs. So the environmental costs are the costs associated with the damage that the very use of water resources causes to the environmental ecosystem or other uses, while the resource costs are a lost opportunity cost imposed on other users as a result of intensive resource exploitation, such as the conflict with non-potable uses. Next slide, please. So this is basically the mechanism that we developed inside the project, which of course has as its center the drinking water service that distributes through the water supply network the water to their users. The users, which are then the users of the water resource, pays through the water bill a part of the environmental and resource cost recovery, for which they are responsible, as we saw in the user pay principle. In this way, the drinking water service can collect enough money to conduct intervention that can help water protection and to help reduce the impact or environmental impacts caused by the water abstraction. In this way, they can protect the drinking water protection areas and conduct an abstraction that can be sustainable over time. Next slide, please. We see here how we piloted the mechanism successfully. So first of all, we needed to activate a working group, and that's why we needed also a live project to do so. In this working group, there were, of course, the multi-utility, the water authority in the area, ourselves as facilitators of the whole mechanisms, and the University of Padua as monitoring and research support. Then we analyzed the pressures and impacts associated with the water abstractions in the area, and in particular in the drinking water protection areas. So we in particular looked at the habitats and biodiversity impact, the future availability of water, the recreational uses, and the land use conflict. For each of these sectors, we identified the best measures, which were mainly nature-based solutions that could be implemented to address these pressures and impacts. And we developed a decision support system to do so. And so we identified some kind of measures, for example, organic and conservation agriculture, riparian vegetation, and forested infiltration areas. Understood which were the interventions that were needed in the area, we were able to include their cost in the investment plan of the local water authority. And in this way, we were able to dedicate 1 million euros into the tariff as environmental mitigation intervention. After the interventions were included into the tariff, we are now implementing the measures. So this is still a work in progress, as you can see in the pictures, but let's say that the money is allocated, so the intervention will be conducted. And this is a real innovation in Italy, where it was the first time that ERC inclusion conducted through actual environmental measures to be implemented. Next slide, please.
You've got 1 minute, Giulia.
Perfect, thank you. So here on the left, you can see the link to the report that better explains what we did in the area. So if you want to find out more, you can find more info at this QR code. But to draw some conclusions, I would say that, yeah, from the European to the national level, there is high potential for this type of mechanisms to develop. In fact, they have very high potential of creating great impacts because of the scale at which they apply, and also their replicability potential. But they need a cultural change in the integrated water service sector, because let's say people should switch from being water managers to be land managers. And this is not, it doesn't always happen. But nevertheless, as we see in this area, an integration of public and private funds seems to be key to diversify intervention and impact at basin level. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giulia. That's great. And thank you for keeping on time. So can my 4 speakers please switch their videos back on? We've got time for just a couple of quick questions. There will be more in the second session. So while you are switching on and coming back to me, one thing has struck me in all of your presentations. Okay, given that we are in 2025, And we have some fairly scary targets coming up for 2030 in terms of biodiversity and restoration. All of your projects took 10 years at least to get to where they are now. What are your opinions on speeding up the process? You know, so Paul, I'm going to come to you first. Paul, can we speed it up?
I mean, we can speed up restoration, I think. Speeding up the nature credit markets is not that easy because you have to have transparency, you have to have it verified by third party, you have to have a mechanism people trust, we have to have a simple way to explain it to people, and that takes a long time. So you're right, we've been doing this for 10 years plus, and the carbon market is just, the voluntary carbon market is just starting to kick off now. So I don't know how you speed that up, but it's a question I ask government all the time. How can they help set the preconditions to move this along? If you think 10 years ago, 20 years ago, Amazon was a place, it was a forest. Now it's a company. How big was Amazon 20 years ago? So the market can kick off quickly. However, I don't think nature credit market is doing what it should or could, and I don't know why.
Thank you, Paul. That's very interesting. Carlos, do you have a reflection on that? How can we speed it up? You took 10 years to get to where you are.
Yes, okay. I think that there is a lot of possibilities to speed up from now on because, as I explained in the presentation, that the first years we use them to build the certification, to have the scientific results, to be able to have strong criteria for the rules of the certification. So it could be a certification that is trustable in terms of technical and scientific background. So from now on, it's a matter of doing a lot of work about marketing, about letting the consumers to know more the certification seal, and multiplying this effect thanks to the different brands that they are joining the project, because many of them they are flag brands, they are top well-known brands in the olive oil market. So it's a possibility of increasing the impact of the certification.
Okay, Carlos, thank you. Good. I'm going to come to you next. And Katerina, are you still with us? She is. Okay, great. I'll come to you last, Katerina. Okay, great. Julia.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to mention only one aspect that I think is really essential, and it is about proving better the efficiency of the measures that we propose in order to show the mutual benefits for the private, or as in my case, public-private sector. So we need to, there are a lot of European projects which are working on this, so I hope in the very few next year important results will come out, but we need to work on proving and making accessible and understandable the efficacy and the efficiency of the measures that we want to develop, which are based, of course, on biodiversity conservation, but also provide a lot of other ecosystem services which can be used and useful to the stakeholders that are involved.
Perfect. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I'm going to ask a second question now, and this one's come through on the Slido, so thank you very much for the question. And this is about as the contributors to the financing of private sector, what benefits could be offered to them so that they have an interest to participate? So Katerina, I'm going to come to you. How do you stimulate that private sector market in your project?
It really depends on the company, because sometimes they just need some PR, so they are doing something good. And sometimes it's even they can get some profit from that. For example, like the examples with the socks, so that was very profitable for them, the type of the socks, because people really wanted to support NGO, even if we got 10 cents from each sock or each product, but most of the benefit went to the company. So sometimes it's only a good feeling, so they are supporting something good, and that's mostly for local companies that we have this experience with, because they want to adapt adopt some wetland, or they want to have, oh, this is our meadow, and so that we support, and that's for our customers. And for the ones that are with international, that's also a profit. So should be a
Perfect.
thing in this.
Thanks, Katerina. Okay, I'm sorry to just cut this very short. We're very short of time. So Carlos, 1 minute to you. How do you get all of your lovely olive producers involved? You're muted.
Yep. Okay, we got it involved in the first step because they were more or less convinced about they need to do something about their farms. They feel that their farms are their own home, and they want to have it in a better conditions. And now the new farmers that they are joining, when you teach them, when you explain them about ecosystem services, about how many things biodiversity can do for them, or how many things they can learn about biodiversity, they are really amazed, and they are really starting to be more observant, more interested, and so on. This is what really triggers them.
An education and an
Yeah.
awareness raising for you.
Yeah.
Paul, I'm going to give you 30 seconds on this. That's all you've got, mate.
Okay, so sometimes they want carbon credits, which is nice and easy. Sometimes they want the warm, fuzzy feeling of helping out and doing the right thing, PR. Sometimes it's to meet ESG targets or CSR targets. And sometimes the most interesting one is to help develop the nature credit market. Some of the corporates we work with realize where it's not working as we want to, and they're actually investing in developing the market. So a wide spread of reasons.
So fundamentally, bringing them in, making them part of the process and part of the solution. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for all of your insights. I'm sorry we don't have more time to discuss, but now I'm going to hand back to Joseph, who's going to tell you what to do next. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lynn, and all the speakers. It was really interesting. Unfortunately, we don't have much time to go further, but the day will continue. So now we have a coffee break. Please come back at 11:30, and then I will give the floor to Manuela Bellotto at 11:30. Thank you very much. See you in 8 minutes. Okay. Hello. We are back, and the coffee break was short, but we have a lot of interesting things to present and discuss. So let's move to Mrs. Manuela Bellotto. Manuela Bellotto will make a presentation on her company, which is called Naturacy, and which is an important company in food in Italy. Yes, and maybe just we can have the QR code again, just a few seconds, so that you know that you can ask question there. Then thank you very much, Mrs. Bellotto. I give you the floor. You have 15 minutes.
Okay, good morning to everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to speak about my company. I'm sorry for my worst English, because it's a long time that I don't speak English and I'm not sure to remember all in a good way. In any case, Ecor Naturacy is a company born in early 1990 from the ideas of a group of friends that beginning 10 years before they started studying Rudolf Steiner philosophy and find out very interesting its ways of looking to the world and to the needs of people. Now, Ecor Naturacy is the largest, the only one chain that distribute only organic products in Italy. The image that you see is the main warehouse that was activated in Bologna, more or less at near the center of Italy, moving all the distribution in this area just to save kilometers in the distribution, because the main important warehouse was before in Northeast Italy, where the company was born, but in reason also for economic, to look to the economy, but also look into the environmental save. It was moved in the center of Italy. The mission of the company is the one that you see here: provide people with healthy food, support healthy agriculture, and promote a healthy economy at the service of the all people, all the community. As I said before, the company was born from a dream of people that was very fascinated by the think of Rudolf Steiner, that create a foundation that is still now the main shareholders of Ecor Naturacy, that is a benefit company.
Manuela, sorry, do not forget to say next slide if needed.
Oh, sorry, next. Yes. Excuse me. Okay, this photo that you see was the people that found what is now Ecor Naturacy, and they starting from them they think to involve themselves in a different skill of life, because they try themselves to grow vegetables, to make a little agriculture, and that the evolution was what is now Azienda Agricola San Michele, that some of you have visited in Italy, and to give the company the way to distribute the products. They create a little distribution in one shop. The first of the big chain that is now Ecor Naturacy. To represent the that engage in all how do you say, all skill of life. The foundation now support also a Waldorf school, in the same that it has provide the association that follow the school activity of the building where the activity are done. And also the president of the foundation is a anthroposophical homeopathic doctor. Just to give the idea of what was the mission and the dream of the founder of Ecor Naturacy, that has always have in the mind the conservation of the environmental, a safe agriculture, the care of the soil and the ground. Next, please. Now, Ecor Naturacy is a benefit company that that gave in themselves several skills and have as the main skill create culture, because it's from culture that the economy can change and people can have a largest vision, and that include ground, people, and all what is the human being of people. The next, please. All this is represented in the brand that you can see at the top of the left top. And also the name is a summarize, which is in the topic of in the dream of the company. E, the letter E, that is at the beginning of the name of the company. It's for economy and ecology. Core, ECO, is for ecology, economy, and core, COR, is for earth. Core is a familiar name in Italy for represent the earth of people. And in the brand, in the imaging, there is also in fact a earth, a bud, for give the idea of the evolution that they expect, that the company expect from all his, let me say, all his ecosystem. And a butterfly for the animals and biodiversity in agriculture, and a lemniscate to indicate the connection between all. Okay, the next, please.
Manuela, beware of the
Yes.
time. You still have time, but thank you for taking care of the time.
Okay, and going on, just to give a look, next please. The company has 3,000 at 3,000 farms that supply products. That means 9,000 organic certified products. And you can see the number about the company. But what is more interesting is the next. That is the topic, next please, in which the company want to be to invest. That is in the environmental, agriculture, seed, biodiversity, animal welfare, water, energy, zero waste, and food and combat food waste. In the social, young generation, local communities, customers, and the collaboration with the society. And the governance, sorry, a sustaining economy and a clear and ownership and governance, because to the founders, now Ecor Natura Sea has all other company in the governance as ownership. You can go on. The company has the next, please, because this is other. Ecor Natura Sea has wrote a mission that is gave also to the employee. Just they know which are the topic that are in the mind and that the company want to reach, and is promote the environment. Sorry. The products that are sold in all the chain and all shops have to improve the human health because they are grown in a health way, and have also to be health for the earth.
For 4 minutes.
Yes, and distribution. The distribution have to have the minimum impact on the environmental, and producers has to be supported in their work to obtain healthy product. All this have to be support. Go on, please. Perhaps we repeat ourselves, but this is an important task for the company to take care of the earth, involving our farmer in a good way, in a healthy agriculture, in a healthy way of produce vegetables, cereal, seed oil, and what else? All this the following of this is the creation of a pact, an agreement with agriculture in order to put the guidelines in the way they have to produce and what they have to take care in their work. Please, you can go on.
Yes, 2 minutes, and good
Yes.
if you concentrate on biodiversity aspects
Yes.
and the link with farmers. Thanks.
Okay, the best, these that you see are the guideline for all farmers that want to adhere to the mission of Ecor Natura Sea. What is required is to create some 10% of the surface, the farm surface dedicated to biodiversity. That could be in different way, but we ask that farmers has to dedicate 10% of all the work to the biodiversity, and to work in a way that is responsible for the ground, so to minimize the soil tillage, use green manure. This is very important to have in the company a cow, stable with cow, and use the manure for the in the ground. Composting this manure, of course, and to assure customer of all this, there is a group of agronomists that go visit all companies, all farm, and give support to agriculture in their work, and that also made some analysis on the product, just to assure the consumer that the product has been grown in a healthy and in a healthy way, and in a way that save also the environmental and try to augment also all the environmental.
Can I ask you to conclude?
Yes, this is the way that the company has to look to her work, and also to assure the consumer and involve consumer in this in all these chain. Consumer has to be aware of that the future is this, to be sure of the product that they found in the shelf of the shop, and contribute with their choice to maintain this good way of do economy. And this is what is important for the company that was done. Make all the chain in the same with the same vision, and support agriculture with a fair price that can give them the possibility to do all this work for the ambient, for the environmental, maintain a good relationship, and can work in a good way with employee, try to increase the knowledge of their employee, and give and communicate all this with the consumer, in order that the environmental effort can be appreciated, and the consumer has to know that the price that perhaps they pay more on the products is really a save for the ambience and the environmental. Okay,
sorry,
thank you very much. Sorry for that.
No, sorry. I mean, it was very good, very interesting. I mean, very interesting to hear about this business model. And we thought it was important to give the floor to a company in this field. This is very important. So thank you very much again. And sorry, sorry for pressing you.
Never mind. Sorry for my English. Thank you.
No. That was excellent. Thank you very much. But please stay with us. Huh? Now, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Stefan Hart, who works for the European Investment Bank. We moved there to a very important sector, obviously the banks. So, Mr. Hart, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. So I'll just dive straight into it. So if you just bring up the first slide. So I've been presenting on similar topics now for the last year on the basis of EIB's work together with the Commission, first under the Natural Capital Financing Facility, and then we really tried to summarize our findings on that facility. Plus, we brought some new market intelligence in from a diverse set of players, and we're still pretty much of the conviction that the findings are still very relevant. But the core message we were trying to convey here is that when we're discussing something like nature or financing nature and so on and so on, it's no different to other sectors, which is ultimately a question of where the money is coming from in the end, and we call that funding. There's often a tendency to, say, discuss say financial techniques rather too early, before the basic revenue side is brought in order. And what we're trying to do actually this year and in the following years with technical assistance and our financing is really to put the emphasis on those funding models, the revenue models, because ultimately without those, there is no banking really. So next slide. Yeah. So this kind of captures a bit the universe. You know, I'm trying to convey a certain image of the world here that we would hold as finances. So it all starts with the revenues, and then, you know, to bridge the expenses with the income, you will need financing. And so in this world, when does that happen? I mean, that happens, for example, if you have to sequester, say, a lot of land, and then gradually develop it, for example, or you need to plant a large area and then watch it grow over time. So that sometimes you simply have to front those expenses. There's no different to other sectors, but there are some specifics, obviously. But what ultimately makes it work for financing players, i.e. the people who bridge the ins and outs, is if the funding streams are there, if there's sufficient scale of the market, you could say, and if there are just enough projects to make it worthwhile to set up an instrument, right? So just through that lens, I mean, before we even talk about clever techniques, I mean, it's really about optimizing, first of all, getting people to part with their money, and then how you optimize the mixing of these different funding sources. And what I think when we're talking about nature is interesting is that if you look at across Europe, there are many areas, many ecosystems that are undermanaged even, and they simply cannot find a profitable way even to operate or maintain these areas. And that's where this kind of clever mixing of, say, local benefits with more global benefits or regional benefits and so on can lift things to a managed state and make a really very big difference in terms of well, developing and monitoring and actually maintaining the kind of biodiversity that we need. Next slide. So what we're doing is we're working on a number of topics that relate precisely to the revenue side now, the funding side, and an old partner of EIB is CDC Biodiversité, a subsidiary of the French National Development Bank. Commission is also very involved in this. We've been working with them to try to enhance or develop their business model now for the last 5 years or so. Their business model is there's a national law that requires infrastructure developers to offset, in a sense. These are low-grade habitats, but they have to compensate for say, the impact of the infrastructure works by either say doing local works, you might say, to compensate for that, or do it offsite. And this is where CDC Biodiversity's business model comes into play. So they're effectively a habitat bank. So somewhere else they're developing some ecosystems, and then they generate these credits that are up for purchase. The real point here is that this is fundamentally the core of the existing model is a regulated model. And there are many names for what you call it, but it is fundamentally a developer tax. And if you look at, for example, the biodiversity net gain model in the UK, it's not far from this idea. You're creating a system whereby developers effectively have to find some cash, and that is ultimately paid by the people buying the houses. That is the ultimate funding stream here. What you can do is you can develop financing techniques that can maybe help nurture this system and a market. And under the NCFF, we actually did a loan whereby the repayment was tied to the sale of those credits. So from the point of view of CDC, that was very, it de-risked them. It meant that they were only liable in as far as they were able to generate the credit incomes. And we took that risk, but we actually priced that risk in the risk pricing. So there's no free lunch here, but it was a mechanism that at least could ring fence a financing model to a specific funding stream. Okay. Now what we're doing is we're actually trying to take all this machinery works equally well in a voluntary setting. So all their ecosystem gain methodology and their project development skills are equally valid when we now go out and work with them to find voluntary buyers of these credits. And today, because there's no uniform market, it's very much a cost-driven market. So there's a minimum cost that has to be covered. And as long as there's a scarcity of these, well, then of course the developers will have to pay it. Next slide. I'm sure you've spoken about Pete already, but some interesting considerations here. As I said, it's often about optimizing the funding model. So in Ireland, we're working on a peatland standard where it's turned out to be a very popular idea with potential buyers of these certificates, in a way, to bundle different ecosystem aspects into one package. So it's one intervention. And the beauty of this is that these metrics on peatlands, for example, are mutually reinforcing. So the water table very much determines the carbon emissions, for example, and of course the vegetation and ultimately the kind of biodiversity. So it's a kind of mutually de-risking elements. But here's the interesting thing. So next to this, of course, for example, the biggest potential users or the potential biggest actors in the landscape are agriculture. And so we're trying to move to a model where we can use a bundle credit that can be stacked on top of, say, more plain vanilla, normal income support streams like the CAP, to promote particular high additionality actions within these landscapes. And that way we're optimizing the biodiversity, we're optimizing use of funding, but also we're getting an optimal story for the buyers of these credits because they know that this is particularly high additional action. So next slide. Of course, the part of this story is actually try to find the people who have good revenue models and try to leverage them already. And there are plenty of examples, for examples of water companies who engage in nature restoration, for example. And what's interesting is as long as the customers and the owners are kind of on board, the legislation gives a lot of flexibility for how much ambition you can apply. And here's an example of us doing that with the Belgian water company and supporting the recovery of the pearl mussel. Next. One very untapped but incredibly important element on the funding side is playing with land values. Cities have been doing it for ages through their planning permissions and local planning. They can actually play around with the value of land. The interesting thing is in our space, because land is so central and acquisition of land is really at the heart of so much of what we do. Sometimes it's kind of the opposite. It's using the planning regulations to prevent inflation of land prices. So we're using similar techniques, but actually to avoid that our money will run out before we've gone out there. And often there are criticisms of land grabbing, but we also have to understand that the big land grab is already happening. And if there's no, say, coordinated public response, then quite a lot of private actors will grab the land. Next. In the absence of these strong market drivers, when we go out and try to price something like biodiversity or nature, I mean, the truth is it's always very bespoke. I mean, payment for ecosystem service is a fundamental, a local arrangement. But even when we're talking about supply chains, so the markets are not particularly good signals for the value of these things. So de facto, when say an owner of a nature project or an ecosystem has to negotiate with a corporate, it's still very cost-based. It's basically what will it take in that local ecosystem to raise it to a higher bar, and that's just what it costs. And is the corporate willing to pay? that's where we are today. I mean, what is the thing worth? It really is so bespoke, and it simply depends on the corporate or whoever the player, what it means to them in their business model or advertising. The point here is that it's a very laborious process. It is the thing that saves the day because we don't have strong markets, but it is quite onerous because you have to enter into a lot of complexity and local data and so on. But that is where we are, and that's where we have to focus. Next slide.
4 minutes left. Sorry, 4 minutes left. Thank you.
Yeah. So I won't go into too much detail, but as I mentioned at the beginning, it's often a closed thought that, because projects in the nature space are small, then maybe we need intermediaries. The truth is, it's very dispersed, and the deal flow is still not huge. And so our experience for the NCFF and working with other intermediaries is that it's been very difficult for private actors to enter into, say complex strategies like this with say, a very big range of funding models and so on. And our say tentative conclusion is that if you want to create something which can really respond to that full diversity, we probably need something at European level, but I'll just get that in a minute. Next slide. I just want to spend a minute on just precisely what we observed on the NCFF. As I said, market drivers are not so strong. So how do you create an ecosystem of instruments in the absence of, say, strong markets that would, in a way, construct a specialization of early stage finances and middle stage capital markets? In a way, you have to artificially engineer it. And what's clearly missing, or should be considered, is, if you look to other sectors like renewables, they've benefited from direct funding on the revenue side to de-risk these projects. And in fact, what we find in nature, even just an additional funding stream, as I explained at the beginning, can change the whole regime and make a big difference. So it's worth exploring an actual funding stream to help sustain ecosystem services. In general, the small early stage projects are struggling, and we need to look at other sectors, what they've done there, but there's some specifics here. What we find is that our response has often been for these early stage projects that we want to come in with consultants and technical assistants, but so often what they need is, just like other sectors, seed capital to keep the lights on, to keep these teams to work with the people they already know. Also, generally, we tend to, through, for example, Horizon and everything, we tend to finance pure research or something that's super commercial. But it's that middle space, the part viable, that we should be rewarding, because they're the ones that ultimately actually can develop into something stronger. Next slide. So really, as we're going into the NRL, what we're saying is we need to create a family of instruments that link up, because markets are not creating these linkages. So we have to create these instruments so that we can support projects really from the early, not so viable stages to the later stages. And of course, a lot of this is about recognizing one very crucial fact about this, is that this sector is not leaving grants behind, not yet. And with that in mind, we need to position our instruments to that reality. And there are instruments that do that in other sectors. For example, in innovation, there's something called European Innovation Council that provides early support for SMEs, but it dovetails with the grant ecosystem. So it's not competing, it's very strongly coordinated. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hart, for a very interesting, very dense presentation. Maybe difficult.
Sorry for that.
No, it's very good. We need to fill the gap between the conservationists and the economists. So that's contributing to that for sure. Thank you very much. Please stay there. I give the floor to Elias Demian. Elias works for Elmen and has been heavily involved in the preparation of this meeting, and he will moderate a Q&A session now. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Manuela. Thank you, Stephen, for excellent presentations. Before we start the Q&A, you know, the LIFE program is already 33 years old this year. Imagine telling an investor at that time that, or a big firm, that in the near future they would compete not only for, you know, getting more market share, but also for the biodiversity impact. This is something quite new. We have seen happening in the last 5 to 7 years. One question, of course, is which are the pressing demands and why this happened now, and if it should have happened earlier, but it's not for today. But the fact that we can see also financial institutions of such high level to be involved in the case and discuss so hardly different mechanisms and blending financial mechanisms, as Stephen said, for me is quite interesting. I would like to start putting down some questions for both. Manuela, first, if you can turn on your camera so that people can see you. We have identified Naturasi as a quite interesting case of a private firm which tries to use impact on biodiversity for you know, of course for corporate gains, because at the end of the day we are talking about private firm. How do you see? I'm going to ask you the opposite. How do you see the demand side? How do you see the demand from your clients responding to all these elements that you presented to us with regards to funding different sides of nature and biodiversity? Manuela, are you with us? Okay, until Manuela is back, Stephen, I will jump into you. You present several different types of funding mechanisms that could or could not work under specific cases. From the experience you have already, which is quite vast in EIB, how can EIB support SMEs, which are the backbone of the European economy, but also larger firms, to actually streamline and identify the specific tools that could actually use them in order to reach having a case of improved biodiversity, nature conservation, and stuff like that? How can we help the people who are on the other side and who are eager to use some of these instruments in maximizing their impact from the private sector initially?
So, I mean, there are, obviously, that is a very big group of people. I mean, the large corporates are one area that are basically, they're financially quite strong. So if they want to commit to some, you know, for example, we can help them by understanding their vulnerabilities and the various sustainability transition say work streams that they have to follow, you know, decarbonization and everything else, adaptation, climate change, all these things are connected, right? So we're already doing that to a certain extent, and we'll expand that, right? But when it comes to, say, our role or the banking sector's role in relation to SMEs, I mean, so there are, of course, there's many banks are involved in SME finance. And to say, I mean, so to say something rather mundane, but actually, some of the definitions are not so obvious to people. Say it's only kind of recently, maybe in the last year or two, where making a clear distinction between the, you know, financing that is generally beneficial, for example, by reducing pollution or whatever, ranging up to investing directly in ecosystems, and just getting that clarity of language helps in the following way. Because if we want to use these financial intermediaries as tools, they really need to know very precisely what it is that they're doing, what is eligible, what's not eligible, and so on. So that's helping quite a lot. Today, there are a number of guarantee instruments that are used for SMEs, and that's our sister organization, the European Investment Bank, channels from the Commission to these banks for SMEs. Now, they say that more firepower is always good. You know, it's a scarce commodity, but what today, I mean, the important thing is that we keep these instruments relatively flexible and we're not too prescriptive, because most of these banks, if they want to get innovative nature things on their balance sheet, on their books, right? They need to be able to diversify this with lots of other things. So a very pure play instrument is very difficult when the market isn't developed, but having an instrument where, say, nature is alongside other eligibilities, that is much easier for the banks then to step into, and then they can use, and so on. What's missing really is to support small projects. One thing is SMEs. In a way, we have a strong ecosystem to finance SMEs, and we can come with technical assistance at intermediary level, at SME level, but small projects that are not companies, but innovative partnerships, for example, that's kind of the missing element, I would say.
And from your experience, because I understand that there is some experience with projects, as you mentioned, how we can link, how we can engage more of these different type of conglomerates of partnerships towards today's objective as well. And then I will pass to another question that came from the audience as well.
Yeah. So what? As I kind of my last slide was beginning to say, I mean, it's all rather bespoke. I mean, there are probably no two partnerships that are completely identical. So you need tools that are really quite flexible. And that adds a lot of complexity, actually, for a commercial business model where you want to do lots of things that are very similar, keep the costs down, do many numbers. And that's where I think we need to be looking at something like an NCFF in the future, but that really is more targeted to that complexity, but understands the implications in terms of the lead times, the complexity, the cost coverage, the kind of risk mandate and risk pricing policies and so on. I mean, this could happen at national level for sure, but really, partly because we're so linked somehow to other things like grants, like the Common Agricultural Policy, it does speak to something which is more a European instrument, to be honest. Not necessarily by EIB, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the demand is there, and it's complex and it's small. So that's the need.
No, and you are absolutely right on the sense that it's good that we have public money available for biodiversity and for the purpose we are discussing, but it's quite clear also from recent reports that these are not enough. We still have to face a significant financing and funding gap for achieving the goals of the European policy, and we should get all the help we need. Especially given the fact that nature is not a market good, does not have characteristics of a market good that can be put in, as in the case of climate change, for example, or mitigation. I don't see
one message is the funding side. So it's the revenue side that we need to develop stronger. So that's when there are ecosystem services or there are uplift in the supply chain or whatever, that this somehow translates into something that can be incorporated in a business plan, I guess. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
And funding for sure has to deal with the way we quantify the cost of externalities from not having a proper standard level of nature, for not having the biodiversity we should have, and all these elements. But it is also for the policymakers and for the financial intermediaries, at least at a high level. I don't see Mrs. Manuela Bellotto being there, so I might exploit your presence, Stephen, if you don't mind, for a couple of more minutes. You discussed also a lot the NCFF. The LIFE program has been working with the NCFF in the past. More or less, in some countries we have seen bigger involvement. In some others, the involvement was quite minimal. This will be my second to last question. Any suggestion from your side how the NCFF should be targeted, should be redesigned or reviewed, so that all the objectives we are discussing today can be achieved in a quicker manner?
Okay, big question, but I mean the need. I mean, put it this way: we looked at about 200 projects, and we banked 11. We might as well have been a venture capital fund, but we were not making the profit that a venture capital fund can make, so that you can support that kind of attrition, right? So cost coverage is going to be an issue. It is the issue, and deal flow, right? What I can say is that towards the end of the NCFF, actually, we could see quite an acceleration. I mean, not like an exponential explosion of the market, but like an organic growth and a lot more interest in this. And honestly, I mean, compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I mean, this is so much more sophisticated. There's so many more players who are interested in this. So what would really, if we could shift something into something that's really targeted at more early stages, if we could have something that also supports the regular players to give them the right incentives, and then seriously consider from European level some kind of direct, say, funding streams that can be blended in with more local streams. So as I said, this is not so crazy. Like EU supports the emergence of the hydrogen economy, for example, local hydrogen projects through contracts for difference. So it's a top up, basically. If there's a revenue shortfall, then there's a guarantee that you'll cover the difference. And that idea is not so crazy for ecosystem services, actually. I mean, there are plenty of places where if you could mix just that additional component on top of maybe some sale of commodities, a local value stream being paid, and then maybe something on top, and then suddenly you have something that is actually viable. So it's a way maybe of thinking of a very high impactful funding mechanism, direct funding mechanism that doesn't cost the earth. Because a priori you could say, oh, it should all be grants. Well, we need to be more clever than that. So that's one way of thinking about it.
Thanks a lot, and it's true that if you manage to increase the multiplier for all this exercise, then you can have also the local society besides the environment happy, so you reach sustainability goals quicker. Now, the very last question comes from WWF through Slido. It's a bit practical question, Mr. Hart. So your short answer on that: how can we engage with the EIB at national level to meet your thinking with places, initiatives of practice?
Well, we are, of course, especially with WWF. We just entered into an MOU with WWF on landscape level nature-based solutions. I mean, okay, the short answer is we're easy to reach. My mail number, we're quite approachable, and we actually we have regular contact with in-country teams of WWF, but also other organizations, TNC and so on. So we have that dialogue going on. Look, I mean, we're trying to find some new ways of going about this. And the agenda that we're developing now as a battering ram for nature is adaptation. So climate adaptation and sort of resilience is a pretty good entry point. That's been our experience. So what starts off as a flood mitigation project ends up being a river renaturing project, for example. And those are the skills, certainly, that civil society have, together with the local players like local government.
Yeah. Okay. I think that we can wrap up that part, and we'll pass the floor back to Joseph. Thanks a lot, Mr. Hart. Thank you, Mrs. Bellotto. Joseph, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elias. Thank you very much, Mr. Hart. I mean, it's good to see that there is a lot of things ongoing, a lot of creativity is needed, and we can expect, I mean, good developments in the future, also as regards more local scale projects. So that's very good to hear. Now I will give the floor to Stephanie. Sorry, I have a doubt now. Sorry, to my colleague Gauthier Clar of CINEA, and also Andrea Bianchini of DG Environment. And they are going to talk about Green Assist, which is precisely a system to support people or companies to develop funding tools for nature conservation or nature restoration. So I give you the floor, Andrea and Gauthier, and thank you very much to Stefan and Elias. See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joseph. Thanks a lot for giving me the floor and also for the invitation to join this really interesting discussion and also to provide my small contribution to this discussion. But you correctly said before, Joseph, that we need to fill the gap between nature conservation experts and economists, also finance experts, and that's what we are trying to do also with Green Assist. I think that we can start with the slides, if possible. Green Assist is an advisory initiative that we set up in 2022 to try also gathering the heritage of the NCFF to use the lessons learned. But let me make a step back before we can move to the next slide. So as my colleague Adrienne Michel at the very beginning said already, well, he stressed that given the ambitious policy target, I mean here the Global Biodiversity Framework, the Biodiversity Strategy to 2030, and the Natural Restoration Regulation, that there is a huge, significant investment needs that we can quantify in around 48 billion per year. But we need to mobilize additional resources to fill the remaining gap, because with public sources, we are already providing some 30 billion per year, but as was correctly said by Stephen, we have to be more clever than offering additional grants. Also, I strongly doubt that we can offer additional 18 billion per year in grants. We simply don't have this amount of money to offer. So to reach this funding gap of 18-19 billion, where we want to the private sector also to come in to help us filling this gap. How to do so? So we can move to the next slide. We have already seen this morning very interesting and successful attempts to factor in the economic value of ecosystem services and secure long-term financing by recognizing, by acknowledging and giving a value to these ecosystem services. But some questions remains open. Who certify the reliability of these nature credits? Let's make the next step and start to call them nature credits. Who set up the market and help defining the price? And so also, who is monitoring and measuring the ecosystem service that are successfully delivered and their public and private value in terms of benefits? So what we need is clear metrics, a verification mechanism, as correctly stressed by the projects that have presented their experiences this morning. And also we need a bit of awareness raising and sensitization to create to create this market, to help creating this market, because the demand is already there, but we need to quantify the economic value of what we of the services that we offer. So it has already been said that the projects are there, the demand is there, but these projects sometimes are small, most of the time are small and overly complex in their preparation. These projects have complex stakeholder environments which require substantial and also lengthy development before they start generating revenues. And there are also some capacity constraints. a combination of the lack of sufficient data about the benefits that this nature project deliver, and together with the lack of the financial expertise within the project team. This means that the beneficiary which proposes this project sometimes cannot afford the cost of the project development, or it's even discouraged from trying it. We have seen there was an interesting demand before that this successful project that has been presented this morning have been delivering the results in some 10 years. The question was how to speed up the process. Well, it's difficult to speed up the process, but what we can do on our side is to try standardizing the process with some clear and certified metrics that we are convinced that they can help to more easily and quickly approach the support to this project, can easily help project promoters to engage local communities and private investors as well. We can move to the next slide to show how we have we are trying to provide an help in this sense. Since the beginning, we have been convinced of need to offer this help in terms of advisory services, in terms of technical assistance to prepare these projects by helping them demonstrating the economic value of these ecosystem services. For this reason, thanks to the support of the LIFE program, we have been supporting an advisory initiative implemented by the EIB directly and Green Assist. With these two parallel yet different initiatives, we are supporting a number of projects, two of which have been already mentioned at the very beginning by Adrienne and will be explained later on by Gauthier. One in France, one in Estonia, to set up a certified system for nature credits, namely in the wetlands and forestry sector. But we are also supporting different assignments, different projects that are going to be prepared, like, for example, the peatland restoration that has been mentioned by Stephen, and also other projects involving, for example, a bank and a pension fund to support regenerative agriculture and sustainable forestry, and so on. So these are the attempts, I think, in my opinion, quite brilliant, that we are trying to support to kind of standardize this process of recognition of nature credits. How we are doing that through Green Assist will be explained now by Gauthier, to whom I'm giving the floor. Gauthier, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for the organizers and Joseph for providing a slot for Green Assist. Yes, I have a couple of slides where I want to, maybe next slide, to present you what is Green Assist. Yeah, I have to apologize. There will be some element of pitching, but of course, I also have the final slides. I know that we're approaching lunchtime, so but I have a couple of slides specifically on financing and biodiversity. But before that, the pitch on Green Assist to the project owners, as we call them. So Green Assist is an advisory service to prepare green or greener investment projects. When we say green or greener, we have to be clear, and I will keep the terms environment for the rest of this presentation, meaning ecological transition. So I know environment has become some kind of buzzword, but here with Green Assist, we focus on ecological transition. And the reason is to build a pipeline of these projects on the how, good to keep in mind that it is not a call, it's open, it's on demand, no call, it's open to project owners and beneficiaries anytime. It's free and customized, meaning that it's customized to the need expressed by the beneficiary or the potential beneficiary and discussed with them. So we try to go the all the needs of the beneficiaries to deliver the project in the end. There are two delivery mechanisms that will be covered next slide, so I do not extend here. It's available for all private and public beneficiaries. No need to be an existing, past, or even future LIFE beneficiary, although this Green Assist is funded by LIFE. And we cover, as you can see, various sectors, circular economy, biodiversity, natural capital preservation, and so on. All this can be found on the Green Assist page of CINEA. Next slide, please. Yeah, I would like to maybe to stay a bit longer on this slide. So within Green Assist, we have two forms of advisory services. We have on the left side project advisory, on the right side enabling advisory. The project advisory is basically for a potential beneficiary that has a existing project or a project to develop, existing or new or something. So here the advisory is delivered by expert that we have selected and that we have pre-vetted in a roster. It consists of typically 20, 80 expert days over 3 to 6 months. All these figures are indicative. We can go a bit longer than 6 months. And as I said, it's customized to the needs. So where we see a high priority, we are prepared to go a bit longer. You can see below type of advisory service that we provide. So it's a lot about business plan, CapEx, OpEx, verification, revenue validation. It's also about cost-benefit analysis, valuing environmental externalities, and so on and so forth. We have also a number of assignments dealing with, helping beneficiary to design, let's say, MRV and guidances for standards, measurement, MRV reporting and verification, sorry. So this we help also to develop these biodiversity credits or carbon credit with co-benefit, as we call it. This also goes with advisory in the field of financing. Here, the experts are actually suitable to provide advice in terms of blending and combined use of funds, but good to keep in mind that Green Assist expertise is not for grant agreement preparation, and experts are kind of, let's say, briefed first to envisage any sort of funding or financing, and then, if there is a need for grant, that could be explored, but not in the form of grant preparation. Now, that's about the project advisory. Now, on the right-hand side, enabling advisory, it's a different format. Here, the expertise is provided by consultancies and selected through a framework contract, basically the big firms, consultancy firms, about the same duration. It's mostly there. The element is that it entails also some capacity building, training, coaching, but it's all about also strengthening the capacity for investment readiness. So there has to be some potential for really investment on the ground. Next slide, please. Yeah, I'm not going to go over this slide, just to keep it, to say that, of course, for the project advisory and deciding specifically for the project advisory, we have this admissibility, eligibility, matching, and so forth, all the blocks that you can see in dark green. Maybe a final word, and this task have been delegated to a contractor, Ecoris. Maybe a word on the bottom right box in green. I mean, once the assignment are finished, then of course we will look for results, because we need to show that the expertise has help really for an investment or something tangible on the ground. It can be any kind of tangible result like capital expenditure or at the level of the beneficiary or along a supply chain, or to some extent some replication. Maybe a word here. I mean, we know, especially in the field of biodiversity, that not all projects will fly, even after benefiting the advisory from Greenassist. So there is obviously no commitment from or required from the project beneficiary to implement, but it goes with a certain amount of accountability on the side of the beneficiary to obviously to use the advisory provided. Yeah, so there is some light monitoring, I would say, but I guess we strongly rely on the accountability of the beneficiary and on the role of the expert to make sure that, on the best effort basis, advisory do deliver some results. Maybe next slide. Yes, I'm not going to go through this all 6 items because you can find them on any web page. Basically, a few things to keep in mind. So for the eligibility, we've applied some kind of VC venture capital approach, meaning that beyond some technical consideration, for example, of course, the necessity to let's say, show a potential for an environmental benefit, and the fact that the project needs to be located in the EU27 plus some additional entities. The VC approach tells us that we want to see a beneficiary that is, let's say, capable, committed, and that has, let's say, control over the project. This is quite important, and this is why in most cases, we have mono beneficiary under our assignment, because it's key that the beneficiary can make decision to implement the project. Yes, maybe the slide. Now, I'm going to, let's say, yes, keep this one in the interest of time. So maybe next time. I think it goes. It's very clear. Yes, because I would like to say a word with regard to the enabling advisory. I see that there are some multipliers, NGOs in the audience, and good. So I want to spend a bit of time. So just to keep in mind, the enabling advisory, you don't need to have a specific project. It's mostly about developing soft skills, capacity building, and it's provided through these consultancy firms I referred to earlier. So maybe to keep in mind that this enabling advisory, it's been contracted to this consultant, but CINEA itself does the technical specification, i.e. the work program. So it's a bit more lengthy and heavy process, just to keep in mind. And this is why we also have our own, let's say, eligibility condition. The first one is that the support will need to bridge a gap. So that requires some discussion with the beneficiary to identify the gap or the gaps to address. The other very important condition is that the beneficiary needs to be suited and equipped to ensure effective liaison and follow-up with project developers on the ground. That is very important because we want the advisory service, the enabling and advisory services provided to filter through the beneficiaries to these project developers, because at their level, they will need this advisory service to implement the project. We need to identify common challenges that are common to all project developers. That could be financial, regulatory, technical, and so on and so forth. That clearly the 3 blocks are must-have. Now below you have nice to have. First of all, we would like to support to be, of course, replicable or scalable to other sectors, geographic areas. And the deliverables, I mean, clearly, because they need to filter through, also with the help of training, coaching, and so on and so forth. They need this deliverable to bring value to the project developers on the ground. So that could be tools, platforms, and it goes with certain KPIs as well. So that's basically the setup for deciding on the eligibility of a request for enabling advisory. An example, next slide. I'm going to go fast on that, but one example of enabling advisory that we have funded with Green Assist, and I don't want to forget because it's implemented by all by our LIFE colleague. It's the close to market. So some of you may be familiar with close to market LIFE. And yes, it's funded by Green Assist, and this is where beneficiaries of LIFE can actually get additional support. Not much, it's actually a very limited number of working days, but it's a good entry point also for those projects that could turn then to Green Assist. So I didn't want to forget to mention close to market, but now I'm going to get into the or maybe you can stop here for a second, because now I'm getting to the part where I would like to say a few words about the involvement of Green Assist. Maybe next slide, or before I get to, or make next slide, so that people, yes. So that's because I have a slide where I would like to tell the audience about what we have done, where we stand today in terms of assignment, as we call it, and with some focus on biodiversity. I would like to share a slide, but I had some confidential information or something that I couldn't really freely share. So I would like to say words about all the assignment that we have in the field of biodiversity. Now, at the moment, we have 88 assignments. 23 are completed. 23 are ongoing, and the rest, of course, is under assessment. Most of them are not about biodiversity. Most of them, there are a lot of assignment in the field of circular economies. But as Andrea already mentioned, we do have a fair amount of assignment ongoing, mostly on biodiversity. First, we have the pilots, as we say, on the biodiversity credits, and we have 3 actions here. We have an assignment that is where the Agence de l'eau Seine-Normandie and the French Ministry of Biodiversity are the co-beneficiary, and with them we are exploring biodiversity for wetlands. So it's a large project to increase the quality of water streams in the area of the agency. The second one is more financing. It's for a fund, or it's not actually a fund. It's a or you may call it a open fund, but it's really a corporate that is Restore, that is a vehicle that will be established as a receptacle to create biodiversity credits or biodiversity, to fund biodiversity actions, activities, then to translate into units of representing the value of these actions, and then those units will be actually transformed. First of all, these units and these activities will be funded by investors, and then these units will be transformed, hopefully, into credits. So that's a nice hack, and that is a very promising project. And it goes with obviously defining what is a unit, how much it's worth, what the market. So there will be pitch to investors and pitch to financial stakeholders as well, hopefully, when this project is more advanced. That will be sometime mid of this year. We have a third project for Estonia, about clearly providing some market analysis for the biodiversity credit, drafting biodiversity credit framework, and also drafting financial structure for biodiversity credit, and these kind of things. And here, forgive me for my poor pronunciation, it's located in the Hiiumaa Island projects. On top of that, as Sandra said, we have actually a number of other requests that are close to biodiversity, 15. It covers regenerative agriculture, forestry, and also some other credits, but not biodiversity credit or pure biodiversity credit. So we have projects in Italy. In Italy, we are helping an Italian real estate fund to, let's say, develop forestry as an asset class. And here we are working. I heard earlier my colleagues of ET4. We are working with ET4 as an expert. Julia Amato, for example. So yes, this is the type of thing that we are doing, helping them to obviously verify, apply standards, scout forest, and verify that they are suitable for the level of the sustainable management that they have in mind, and these kind of things. So I'm not going to go over the 15 requests that we have. It would be too long, but just to give you a sense of what advisory can be obtained in the area of biodiversity. Also to note that amongst those beneficiaries, that can be pure developers, forestry owners, or things like that, or I mean, so not things like that, but entity like that, but that could be funds, because we see, and that is actually very consistent with the principle that I said, that we are dealing with beneficiaries that are in control. When the fund is in control and has decision right, that will obviously trigger the investment on the ground, then the fund can be the beneficiary. So we have a number of assignments with some funds, or as I said, with some financial players that are working for funds, like validating and providing the MRV, as I said earlier. So we have a number of, a small number, but it's growing, of these players developing these standards for carbon plus type of credits. And then maybe I'm going to, before I forget, and we have also one example in the field of biodiversity of enabling advisory. Again, that has been contracted to a big firm, a big consultancy firm. And here we are providing transversal assistance to a EU investment manager, a Dutch investment manager, but also working with a North American anchor investor. And this, let's say, investment manager will shortly come to the market, addressing or pitching to institutional investors to bring them to develop a project in the EU, of course. There is one North American anchor investor, but the project themselves will be in the EU. And we will be across forestry, biodiversity, nature-based solution, and regenerative agriculture. So that's, we will obviously help them through the fundraising and the financing of this fund. So interesting perspective, yes?
Yeah, if you can wrap up, thank you.
Yes, I'm going to wrap up, and unfortunately it's about the last slide, but I really maybe you can flip back to the earlier slide, please. Yes, this one. Yes, I wanted to give some takeaway I picked up from discussion with experts and beneficiaries. So on the left blocks, you see that, of course, everyone, I think that there's an agreement that natural benefits are common good, undervalued, hardly monetized. And as Stephen said, it's a lot about willingness to pay. You have also a block adjacent to that. We see that investors, there are some demand from investors, either because they want to address environmental goals, or just because they see some investment return, like through accretion of value, long-term CO2 capture, or the, let's say, credits. So that's what some lesson we've learned through the variety of assignment that we see, that there is a diversity of business model. We have beneficiaries that are addressing the market like a real infrastructure asset, where they see some long-term cash flow based on of revenues from sustainable management. We have, second point, also nature as a creditable asset, where the idea of the beneficiaries to monetize those positive impacts through credits, either carbon credit plus co-benefits or biodiversity credits. We have also some public-private model. Maybe the case of the water agency is a good example, attracting payment for ecosystem services. And to make it even more complicated, we have hybrid models where all these flows of revenues can be mixed. So that leads me to some points of attention. I have 6, so maybe I will spend some time on that. First of all, we all realize that there has to be some understanding as to the expectation from the demand side and the supply side, and whether there are expectation in terms of communication or expectation of return. So that has to be very clear why people are doing that. Another point of attention, I think, has been mentioned before, is that difficulty here is that all these points, the project actually mingle diverse diversities. So there is an asymmetry, a risk of asymmetry of information. There is a need for transparency of each other expectation. And this is quite complicated because we're dealing with a lot of massive amount of information and dealing with this information and side standard and everything can be disruptive. And not to forget that they could be biased, negative biased in between these various communities. So the point of attention is obviously to work transparently to get rid of this bias. I'm not going to expand on the last on the third point. Land scarcity is obviously one obstacle that we've seen. Price, I think that has been mentioned before. Maybe to stop, as Stephen said, on point 4 and 5, they go together. It's clearly necessary to have a good idea of the cost, of the savings that are, and the benefits, and depending on the level of environmental ambition and the level of benchmark and standard that those projects they want to apply. We all understand that the more ambitious environmentally, the higher the cost, or maybe the more benefits foregone to establish sustainable management. But that has to be kind of monetized in some way, and to see what is the optimal, let's say, arbitrage in between cost and return.
Gauthier, please.
Yes. And then final line, and the whole idea is obviously to establish nature as an asset class, meaning that these people, this project, they need to integrate notion of security, liquidity, and maturity. The bottom row is actually the most important. I think that we need to do is obviously the key point is to establish credibility. How do we do that? Clearly, we can improve on advisory. And this is what Green Assist is for. So, Green Advisory will create credibility. There is also a role for policy, addressing regulatory risk. Regulatory risk, I mean, it's really about definition of standards and so on. And my colleagues obviously are working on that. But there is also a need, and we hear that from projects, for financial support. The whole idea being to de-risk, as Stephen said, this project. Grant may be in the picture, but what I wanted to convey, what I feel, is that the financial support, it needs to show some alignment and some skin in the game. Alignment,
okay, we need
yes.
to stop. Sorry.
Okay, so I will leave it as a question mark.
Unless two words. But
and then the next slide, maybe next slide, where you can find information where you can apply.
Okay, thank you very much, Gauthier. Thank you very much, Andrea. I mean, this is for the whole attendance. So there is a service that is available to you, because I'm sure there are many good ideas among the people attending this meeting. So please, the Green Assist is there for you, and you can contact them if you need advice or have a good idea. Now I will pass the floor to yes, sorry, my video. I pass the floor to Stephanie Chan. Stephanie Chan works in the same unit as Andrea Bianchini in DG Environment in the Sustainable Financing and Investments unit, and she will moderate panel discussion with the 4 live projects that made the presentation before. So we are looking forward for this discussion, and obviously some questions of the chat will be answered at that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph, and good morning, everybody. So I'm going to ask the 4 panelists to turn on their camera and unmute themselves. We're going to go for a panel session before the questions and answers, so questions from the audience. And in that second part, we will take the questions from the Slido, for which you have the link in the chat. So the first question for our panel today is related to the obstacles and the barriers. Could you tell us a bit more about what were the main obstacles that your projects faced in setting up innovative schemes in attracting private funding? And how did you, or how do you overcome them and limit their consequences? So I'm going to ask Mr. Ruiz to start the tour de table. So I can't see if Mr. Ruiz
Yes,
is here.
I'm here.
Okay, very good. The floor is yours.
Okay, so regarding barriers, we have several, of course, but if we focus on the investment of the farmers, which is the main funding source we want to mobilize, we want them to be their own investors for their farms, and to channel all the other investors to them. The first main barrier is that most of the farmers are really very influenced by the major agricultural organizations. And many of these agricultural organizations are controlled by large economic groups and large landowners that prioritize the maximum production at minimal cost. This model aiming to selling at the lower possible prices. So despite in this organization, maybe the majority of the members are small farmers and small exploitations. It's not them what they are defending, these major groups who are continuously promoting this agro-industrial model. So we needed to overcome this barrier, and we have found that inside this organization there are some people, some technicians that they are also willing to do something more in favor to these traditional farmers, or to these small-sized farmers, and we have tried to develop initiatives together, so the members, they can see that that there is different possibilities. Because in general, in agriculture, there is usually a resistance to change for the farmers. They are used to do the things in a certain way, and it's really very difficult for them to change the ways that the things are being done according to them, like all the life, no? But that's why we choose to do a demonstration project, demonstrative project, and I think that luckily the involvement of some flagship farms has helped us to demonstrate them, because usually it's much easier when this message is not they don't receive this message from us, from technicians, from conservation organization, but if they receive from their equals, from other farmers, usually it's better accepted.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. So fighting resistance to change, building alliances, demonstration projects, these are all very concrete actions that can be built on. Mr. Ledbetter, would you like to talk to us a bit about the barriers that you found and how you overcome them?
Yes, I'd echo quite a few of those. One of the interesting things that's happening is in our rush to get credit markets up and running, there are too many choices out there for landowners, and it's confusing because they are hearing things like, oh, you can sell your credits, but if you wait a year, you might get biodiversity credits stacked with carbon credits. They say, I'll tell you what, we're going to wait. And then they wait, and they end up waiting longer and longer, and nothing happens. It's a paralysis of decision making. We think that the prices of carbon in particular are just too low. The current voluntary carbon price is, £20 maybe. We are working with higher numbers than that, but again, why sell your carbon at £20 a ton or €20 a ton when you know climate change is going to get worse, thus it'll be worth more, and they wait for that as well. There's a complexity around these things. It's not like buying a mobile phone contract. These things are often 30 years at least, and possibly longer, and the complexities of the contracts are new and a bit scary. And that is something we have to yet resolve, doing it a bit slowly. There's no clarity about the risk to the investor or the buyer yet. For example, if you are engaged in a 35-year peatland code contract, what happens in year 27 when a massive rainstorm causes a problem? What kind of upkeep costs are there? Who's responsible for it? So we are working through these things with a series of workshops this year. And then silly things like funding timings. You can't always get the grant funding to match the private sector funding at the same time. That often comes in different times and cycles, which is a challenge. And then you have the naysayer, which the previous speaker said, people who don't want to do this. They don't want to bastardize nature by selling it. And thus there's a, not wanting to do things because it's not the right thing to do. So that being said, these things are moving on. Because it's new, we are making progress and we are developing these markets. And I think, meetings like this certainly help us share those concerns and how we've done things and going forward, how we do things going forward.
Thank you very much for this. And indeed, it's a networking meeting, which may increase connections afterwards, and it's just a step in the process. So thank you very much for this and for this summary. Mrs. Tuhaska, would you like to answer the question for your projects?
Oh, yes, but the answer also goes with that we are NGO, so we use different sources. And in Slovakia, it's now we have to little compete with the charity and with the supporting with the other very necessary things. So usually companies go for that. So we have to really explain why it is important also to support nature conservation. And from the other part, also, we would like to avoid greenwashing because we are NGO. We don't want to support any company. So it's also from our side, we have to decide who we want to cooperate with. So avoid greenwashing, which we wouldn't like to support. And it also depends on the type of the project. Of course, if we are doing the river restoration or wetland restoration, we are thinking now about carbon credits as well. But if you are supporting or searching for supporting, for example, farmers, so then you have to also orient your efforts for different type of the companies and farms and support. So it really depends, but those are the main barriers that we face now.
Thank you very much. A very complimentary view from an NGO. Mrs. Amato, would you like to share about the barriers that you found?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So I will say also really thinking about the practical aspect of the implementation of the project at the beginning and even before writing the proposal, we had a problem with, let's say, alignment among stakeholders. So we had a multidisciplinary team, we had researchers, and we had the water utilities officer, and we have biodiversity experts, and all of these people spoke different languages. And so first of all, we needed to adjust our languages to make them comprehensible to each other, let's say. First this, and then to align our vision towards the area we were working into. So it was really a matter of alignment between our visions, and also adapting the language, the technical language of biodiversity with the technical languages and the technical targets and some kind of rigidity that we have in the tariff with the water utility. So with what was required by the wanting us to implement the payment that we wanted to do. So to integrate biodiversity into the water tariff. So and also in this was very useful to create evidences for the intervention that we were proposing. So as I was mentioning before, making clear what were the impacts that we were expecting for this kind of intervention helped us convince somehow the water utility to get on board with this project. And another thing was the cultural barriers that we encountered, again, within the water utility, because of course they are used to implement much more traditional measures, gray infrastructure measure for the water management. And so talking about nature-based solutions and wetlands and water forested infiltration areas, it was all new to them. And of course, they didn't trust, let's say, at the beginning to this kind of intervention, also because they didn't have multidisciplinarity in their competencies. They were just like civil engineers, etc. So of course, we also did some training and capacity building activities with them, and also, again, providing evidence. So yeah, I will say these are the main issues we encountered at the beginning.
Thank you very much for this. That was very insightful. Maybe now turning to the second question. So on the success factors and the replication, several of the projects presented today have worked or are working on replication and transferability, or potentially could be replicated. So based on the implementation of your projects so far, can you already draw conclusions on what were or are the success factors, and what more would be needed in terms of enablers for these to be successfully replicated at large scale? And maybe I'm going to take advantage of having you on the screen, Mrs. Amato, to ask you to start answering this question for your projects.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, as I was mentioning, our project in particular, I think it's really replicable because it's based on a European regulation, which is to be applied throughout Europe and also Italy, of course. So I think it's really interesting this aspect, and I will share a couple of success factors. The first one, yeah, is the integration of funds. So understanding the different interventions, what could they come, but this is no news, I think, to all of us. We also at some point gained political support, and this was key for us to help us implement and make the stakeholders agree on the intervention. And then, based on the fact that the water utility also has a direct link and a direct relationship with the citizens, with their users, we also make use of this information to show that the willingness to pay of citizens for this kind of measure were sensibly higher than for traditional measures. We found out with an interview, a willingness to pay interview with the citizens, and found out that their willingness to pay were 7 times higher than for traditional measures. And of course, this gave a lot of motivation to the water utility to proceed with these mechanisms. Then, of course, this mechanism also aligns the activities of the water utilities with the compliance that they have to do with the Green Deal and the regulation in general. So, of course, this is also another driver that is really strong in our case. What will be needed? Yeah, the cultural suite that I was mentioning before is really key to us. Yeah, I don't know. I can't think on anything more at the moment, but I can still
That's
keep
already
thinking
a lot.
about that. But yeah.
Thank you very much. And well, we're lucky to have very different projects today at different stages of implementation as well. Mrs. Tuchaska, I know your project is still ongoing and in early stage, but do you already have early lessons on success factors and enablers for replicability?
Yes, but it's also, if I can talk about other projects as well, so it really depends on, again, on the type of the action. So if you are talking about the restoration of river branches or a wetland, so then the most important thing is to talk with the state companies and state enterprises that work with the water, and then they have their own budget. So the most important thing is to convince them to use that budget for nature restoration activities. But this project and also plenty of our others are focused on restoration pastures and grasslands and working with the farmers. And we started to realize that it's really important to show people and show the public that it has plenty of benefits, not only the production, but it has plenty of ecosystem services, and that it's possible to do that. So in that respect, we started the program that is called Living Landscape. And it's working kind of eco-labeling scheme. So we are promoting farmers. They are doing the similar restoration or even the similar way of farming that is nature friendly, and we are supporting them, and we are also promoting those farms to help them to sell their products and to get better customers and better knowledge in Slovakia all around. So the farms could be shown as a good example, as a best practice as well. And it is shown also to farmers, so you don't need a really huge project for doing that on your land. And that's also a lot about communication and PR and helping them to create their own nature conservation measures on their farms.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Ruiz, would you like to build on this with your agricultural perspective?
Sure. For us, the key for have a good potential of replicability is that we have based our work in with a very serious scientific design. So now when we are thinking in adapting to other areas, we have already studied the circumstances that could happen in other areas, because we have selected very different kinds of demonstration farms and so on. And then I think one strong point is that we are working through a certification. So the certification, the concept is easy to understand for the consumer, to tell them that you are buying a product that is produced in a farm where the biodiversity is increasing. It's not only best practice based, but it's result based. So you can tell them the story of the results, that the number of birds, the number of plants are increasing. Regarding what would be needed, of course, a lot of things in terms of our own partnership. Maybe we would like more assistance in the steps to build a business model based on this certification, because it's something that we are lacking a little bit, as we are conservationists, researchers, some farmers, but in this field, maybe we are a little bit in need of this. And in general, a bigger support of the public policies, the agricultural policies, to the private certification, the private seals, because they focus very much in organic farming, which is okay, it's very, very needed. But we don't have really a big or small support from public authorities in terms of building a rural development intervention based on this kind of schemes or so on. So this is mainly what I will ask.
Thank you very much. And I guess you've heard the call from Green Assist right before in terms of possible applications.
Yes.
So don't hesitate.
Yes, it's very interesting
as well. That Mr. Leadbitter, your project is finished as a live project, but it goes on. And so I'm sure you're thinking about larger scale replication, and we've seen it's already at quite a large scale. So what would be your insights on the success factors, and what more would be needed then to allow this replication?
I think what we did right was to realize the need to replicate, have transferability aspects to what we do. And we did that in the project by involving one of the project partners, Eurosight, which is a pan-European NGO, which was our dissemination vehicle across the EU. So that has proved immensely helpful, and still is today, because we work with Eurosight to, collaborate. And that's what we've done: collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. We also tapped into the United Nations Environment Program, the Global Peatlands Initiative, which provided a high profile and that kind of credibility of the work we were doing. So that really worked quite well. And I would always collaborate. Collaborate, don't compete. It's just what we need to do, especially in the conservation sector. What else has worked quite well is to show the people, it's a simple thing, but show corporates, show the decision makers what you're doing, show them the site. Once they see, especially where we are, the nature of the scale of what we do, it's immense. And people are so impressed by it that they kind of, yeah, we'll buy into that. We understand what you're doing. So show them what you're doing. And then also the idea of bringing together the different sectors of the economy, let's say. I know it's oversimplification, but government, conservation, and private sector tend not to talk at the same table at the same time. So to sit down and talk about what can government do to help stimulate private sector investment? What does a conservation community need to be able to use that money? And what does the private sector need to be able to support with that money? So those conversations don't always happen. So more talking amongst the sectors of the economy for our purposes have worked quite well. And then obviously the last thing is the Great North Bog coming together, 6 big peat partnerships coming together, making one very large partnership. And the kind of attention that gets has proved quite effective for us.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So a lot of ideas probably as well for projects that may start in the future and other projects coordinator or project promoter. Turning now to our last questions for this panel. So some of the projects began their design and implementation phase quite a few years ago, some as early as 2015 or 2016. So the question is, well, today, what would you do differently? Which lessons would you draw to design, implement the project, monitor its impact, taking into account the current economic climate, the current policy, and the need to demonstrate the impact of the projects to private investors? Maybe turning to you, Mr. Leadbitter, would you have lessons to share beyond the success factor that you've already identified, maybe?
Yeah, it's difficult. What do I wish I knew earlier? A couple things that in the case of the peatland code, it sounded like a very simple concept, but actually the details of it, and rightly so, it has to be robust and verifiable and not just something that is short term. Having a clear message about that earlier on to take to sellers. We're finding in the UK, it's the seller of the carbon credit that has more of an issue with the complexities than the buyer. So there's a lot of carbon in the ground. There's a lot of interest to buy said carbon, but there's not a lot of people wanting to sell the carbon because of the complexity of the peatland code and the nature of this kind of thing. So I wish we'd known that earlier. However, I'm not sure how we could have known that earlier. And the other thing too is, I don't think we appreciated the lack of skill sets that was going to be needed for this. Ecology and economy, they tend to not come together in one person. So having people who are trained, who can understand ecology and understand, peatland ecology and why you have to do this, but also explain to the finance world how these things come together. And those people are like unicorns right now. There's not many of them around. So if I was a younger person, I'd be going to university for green finance, because I think it's a very exciting aspect of what we do. However, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I don't think we realized that we needed such a thing. We thought something different. So it's about realizing that, perhaps we didn't know what we didn't know back then, but I'm not sure how we could have changed that.
Thank you very much. But at least these are lessons for the following project. So it's really good to have them. Then maybe Mrs. Amato, would you have lessons on maybe things you would do differently once, maybe you were not able to know them before, but building on your experience and your knowledge acquired with these projects?
Yes, thank you. I have one main issue, let's say, that was also the main difficulty that we encountered during the project. So we also started, as you know, the implementation of our intervention, and the actual implementation was really, really complicated. And was that complicated because we didn't completely understood the involvement of, let's say, other regulation that could come across when you start planning this kind of intervention. So I will, let's say, consider better what kind of intervention to do at the beginning, And this is also linked together more closely, let's say, to the innovative financing scheme, to the better consider what is the demand of interventions of ecosystem services, what is the need of our stakeholders in this term. And so not proposing our intervention and make them fit, but already starting planning together with, in this case, with the water utility, what they would like. So abandon a little bit our theoretical approach and embrace more listening approach in order to put the demand of ecosystem services and biodiversity at the center, especially when approaching a new sector as we did. So yeah, and together with this, being able in the end to develop together a reliable scheme, always considering to avoid greenwashing, of course, because when talking with the private sector, sometimes they need, I don't know, quick answers and quick communication things to say, but of course we need to be very careful on that.
Thank you very much for this. I see we're approaching the end. We are at the end of this panel session. Maybe just in a very quick way, one or two things you lessons learned, things you would do differently, Mr. Ruiz, maybe? You're mute.
Yep. Okay. Maybe I totally agree with Mr. Leadbeater that I would have searched for this profile of experts in ecology, environment, and economic business at the same time. This would have been very, very helpful to overcome many difficulties in terms of business model and so on. I think I would have started earlier with our training programs for farmers, because this, I think, is also a very useful tool to convince all the producers. And being a little bit not very polite in general, I would have been more aggressive in our marketing or communication strategy at some points, because when you see some messages of some companies doing very clear greenwashing, telling such a big lies sometimes, you feel that you have been like very naive, and we should have been like much more, I mean, aggressive, not in the bad term, but explaining the things more clear and calling the companies and the strategies by their name since the beginning. This, I think, would have helped us a little bit.
Thank you very much for this. That links with a question actually from the chat, but maybe right before we turn to this question, Mrs. Terhaska, I know your project is still ongoing. Do you already have one or two lessons to share with the audience?
Maybe it's not something that I would change or regret or something, but maybe it's a good advice for others that are writing projects. It's good to have some good and charismatic flagship species that you can sell to people, and it's also to companies. If you are talking, for example, okay, let's restore the meadow, so people don't understand what's the difference between the very high diversity meadow and the very common one with the 10 species, and what's the difference and why it is important to support such a restoration activity. So it's always important to talk, for example, about butterflies and to specific one species of butterflies or pollinators, or to find something that is interesting to the company or to the public, so you can raise that. For example, to find something. I'm also working on a project on ground squirrels. They're really cute. We don't have a problem with the co-financing. So it's just people are really want to support such a project. So it is also important to know your audience, what you are promoting.
Thank you. Very good advice indeed. Maybe linking to the greenwashing that Mr. Ruiz was mentioning before, I see that we have a question in Slido about greenwashing risk. And this question is the following: do the donor or supplier of funds, so the investor, raise the barrier of greenwashing risk? And if so, do you communicate about the purpose, impact, and transparency of the projects? So how do you manage and communicate about your projects to make sure you clearly show you're not greenwashing? I understand is the question.
May I go?
Sure, please go ahead.
Okay. So in general, when we approach the private sector, we avoid greenwashing by adopting the mitigation hierarchy, which is a concept that maybe a lot of us already know, but it is basically addressing the impacts on the environment in a specific order that ensure us to maximize our effort and our results, let's say. So basically it means first thing to avoid the impact that I can avoid, then reduce the impact that I can't avoid 100%, then mitigate where I produce the impact, and then only at that point offset what I can't avoid before with the previous methods. And also only after compensating or setting, we can talk about positive gain on biodiversity or on carbon, on whatever impact we might consider. So we follow this path with the companies that we work with, and this helps us to avoid greenwashing.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to come in? Yes, Mr. Roos?
Yes. Okay. I think that not for us, but maybe for the farmers and the companies that they are selling their products with our seal. What we tell them and we give them is a lot of information of what are the results, that they can communicate that the certification is based on results, scientific results, that all the methodologies and so on are supported by scientific methods, and being very transparent that all our research is published in important journals, that everything is available in the webpage, so they can easily answer any question they have about this issue.
I see that there is a related question about standards in the Slido. A question to Mr. Leadbitter. What standard are you working with to certify the carbon credits and why?
Can you just repeat the question? Sorry.
The question is, what standard are you working with to certify the carbon credits and why?
Right. So in the UK, there is only one standard. That's the UK peatland code. Why? Is because there's only one standard. It's a very high standard. It's one that's been endorsed by DEFRA, the government department in the UK, and it's very robust. It's scientifically robust. It's peer reviewed, et cetera, and it's very conservative. So the actual number of carbon credits that pop out of a site are considered to be conservative, and then there's a 25% buffer held back for contingency as well. So there is another one in the UK starting to evolve called Wilder Carbon, which is a slightly different one. But again, the challenge you may have is if you have too many of these, you create that confusion in the market again. But we're always trying to use the highest standard possible because that generates the best results on the ground.
Thank you very much. I see we still have a few minutes. One question then related to the type of ecosystems that maybe some of you may have insights on. The question is, all examples that we have seen today focus on terrestrial ecosystems. Could these be applied on marine coastal ecosystems as well? So I see some possibilities of replication, but maybe you could tell us more about these possibilities that you may see for replication to marine and coastal ecosystems. Mr. Leadbitter, maybe.
So if you consider a peatland as a water-based system, albeit freshwater, there are some similarities there. I mean, this is really about if you have a metric. So if you look at seagrass or something like that, if you have a metric that's been accepted, verified by peer-reviewed science, that has an independent third-party register, an independent third-party validator, and you develop the market and the trust, you can apply all of these lessons to any ecosystem you want. I mean, The peat one's more advanced, I think. Again, as I said in my presentation, only because we've gone first, so to speak. But any of these ideas are transferable as long as they are verified, third party, scientifically robust, etc. The problem with all that is it takes longer than you want. It probably takes 5 to 10 years to get a new metric system up and running, I would say, and we probably don't have that kind of time. So the basic principles can be applied across any ecosystem, including marine, I think.
Thank you very much for this. I see we're reaching the end of this session. I would like to take just a couple of seconds to thank very much all our panelists for sharing with us their very interesting projects indeed, and also their insights and lessons learned. And I may turn to Gauthier Clar from Green Assist for one last question about how to access then advisory from Green Assist. Are there specific eligibility criteria from NGOs or specific advice you would give to NGO who would like to apply?
Thank you, Stephanie. I think that with my presentation, you will find on that some ideas about the eligibility. If the question comes from an NGO, I take it that it regards what we call the enabling advisory. So the use of the consultancy firm that we have selected under the framework contract. Maybe a word here, CINEA will play a very active role because we are the one designing the technical specification and the work program and defining with the beneficiary, of course, as we did for the investment fund that I referred to, the nature of services to be provided. So we will apply some eligibility. I think that they are also clearly in a slide, at least, and the 3 must have and the 2 nice to have blocks if you find the slide. But to keep in mind that for NGOs, it's very important that you can filter and provide the advisory services that you will receive as a potential beneficiary to project on the ground. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you have the right structure and the ability to reach out this project, because we want to provide these advisory services to you, but for the ultimate benefit on project and investment on the ground. That is the core DNA of Green Assist. So that's very important. And the other must-have is obviously to identify transversal issues that obviously makes sense to most of your constituents. Now, practically, how you do that, I'm trying to send the functional mailbox of Green Assist right now, but I'm having some difficulty doing that through the chat. So thank you for Elias for passing the message to all participants. And then if you have more questions on that, please use this functional mailbox. I'd be happy to provide more details about that.
Thank you, Gauthier. So a big thank you from my side, and I give the floor to Joseph to close this first morning.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephanie. I think we had a very exciting morning, a very diversified types of questions, of presentation. Things coming from the top, things coming from the bottom, and talking between economists, conservationists, also probably authorities. So that was, I think, good. We'll have another meeting tomorrow, the same time, where we will have a deeper discussion on 4 different topics. You will receive an email to connect, but please use the same link as tomorrow, but you will receive an email reminding you that link, and we will start tomorrow at 10. So I would like to thank you all, and I wish you bon appétit.
Ωραία, φίλε, πώς κόπηκε έτσι?
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
You, goodbye.